What if Harry inherited Wonder Woman's lasso after Diana died, protecting him from Voldemort? A Harry Potter x DC crossover in 7 chapters. Chapter 1. The Princess at Godric's Hollow. On the Themysciran, the sea did not crash. It breathed. It rolled against the white stones of the cliffs the way a mother breathes against the cheek of a sleeping child, present, patient, undemanding. Diana of Themysciran, daughter of Hippolyta, princess and warrior, had grown up listening to that breathing. She had learned, before she had learned to speak, that the world had a heartbeat, and that hers was meant to keep time with it. She was alone in the temple of Hestia on the evening it changed. The temple was a small one, small by Themysciran standards, which meant it had only 12 marble columns instead of 40, and that the open dome above the altar admitted only one shaft of evening light instead of a host of them. The light fell now on the lasso, which was coiled on the altar as if asleep. Diana had been told, as a girl, that the lasso of Hestia was a length of golden rope spun from the goddess's own girdle, and that it could compel any living thing to speak truth, and that it could bind any falsehood, and that one day, when the time came, it would call its bearer the way the sea called the moon. She had not believed the last part then. She had believed the others. She had been a practical child, and practical children believe in tools more easily than in destinies. Tonight she stood before the altar with her palms open. She had come to pray, which on the Themysciran meant to be still and to listen. The air smelled of olive smoke and salt. Outside, somewhere, a cithara was being played by a sister who never seemed to play it well, and Diana found herself smiling at the small, imperfect music of home. Then the lasso burned. It did not burn the way fire burned. It burned the way grief burned, a cold, exact, urgent heat that found the bone first and worked outward. Diana's hand was at her side, 3 paces from the altar, and still she felt it. She felt it the way one felt a struck bell from across a courtyard, the shape of the sound before the sound itself. She crossed to the altar. She lifted the coil. It was warm against her palm, and the warmth had a direction. It tugged very gently, the way a small dog tugs at a leash when it has seen something the human has not yet seen. Diana followed the tug with her eyes, out of the temple, across the courtyard, past the cliffs, over the sea, into the empty western sky. She knew, without knowing how she knew, that something was about to happen on the other side of that sky that she could not allow to happen. She knew, also without knowing, that the something concerned a child. The lasso pulled. Diana, very calmly, set the coil over her shoulder and began to walk to find her mother. Hippolyta was on the upper terrace of the palace, reviewing dispatches with her general. She looked up as Diana entered, and the look in her daughter's face caused her to set the dispatches down before Diana had spoken. "It is calling me," Diana said. She did not need to say what. Hippolyta closed her eyes and stood very still for a moment, the way one stands when one has just felt the first tremor of an earthquake one has long expected. Then she opened them, and Diana saw in her mother's face the small private breaking that mothers carry inside them perpetually against the day their children leave. "Where?" Hippolyta asked. "Across the veil," Diana said. "Outside our reality. I cannot see the place clearly yet. There is a house, there is a child, there is a man who is not entirely a man, and the child is meant to die tonight. Hermes can carry you. I know, you may not return. I know that also." Hippolyta looked at her daughter for a long time. Then she did the most extraordinary thing Diana had ever seen her mother do, which was to step forward and put both palms against Diana's face and press her forehead briefly to Diana's forehead and say nothing at all. After a moment, Hippolyta stepped back and was again the queen. "Go," the queen said. So Diana went. She summoned Hermes at the western shrine. He came down out of the air in a way that always reminded Diana of a leaf descending on a windless day, improbably gentle, considering the speed it implied. The god looked at the lasso and at Diana's face and made a small sound that was either amusement or sorrow or both. "You're going to cross the veil," he said. "Yes. You know this is an injustice belonging to a world that is not yours. All injustices belong to all worlds," Diana said. "That is what the lasso is for." Hermes smiled, and his smile had the strange, ancient quality of someone watching a great wheel turn at a speed they alone could see. "You always did make my work easy and my heart hard, princess. Take my hand." She took it. The crossing was not what she expected. She had crossed dimensions before, on errands of the gods, and she remembered those crossings as a kind of dissolution and recomposition, a brief disassembly of the self into light and the reassembly elsewhere. This was different. This was like walking sideways through a wall made of music. There was a thinness, a thrumming, and then a colder, smaller air on the far side, smelling of rain and wood smoke, and a dampness that did not exist on the Themysciran because the Themysciran's air was always salt-warm. She came down in a village. It was a small village. She knew at once, the way one knew things in dreams, that the place was called Godric's Hollow. The name itself was strange to her tongue, but the lasso held it in its warmth the way her own hands held the coil. There was a war memorial in the square. She registered it absently, and a churchyard, and rows of small stone houses with their lights lit against the autumn dark. Lasso pulled, Diana ran. She had never run on a road like this. The road was paved in black stone and her sandals slapped it strangely, but she ran the way she had been taught to run as a child, which is to say she ran with her whole body and her whole attention. The houses passed. A cat watched her from a wall and did not flinch, which she registered as odd. Cats flinched from strangers. This one looked at her with an expression she could only describe as approval. The lasso pulled harder. She turned a corner. A cottage, whitewashed, two-storied, with a hedge that had not been trimmed in months, and a garden gate that stood open. Light glowed in the upper windows. Through the lower window, a kitchen window, Diana saw, with herbs hanging, she could see a man with untidy black hair and round glasses laughing at something a woman with red hair had said. The man was holding a baby. The baby was reaching for the man's glasses with an expression of great seriousness. Diana put her hand on the garden gate. She thought, in that instant, that this was the most ordinary scene she had ever loved. She had not loved many ordinary scenes in her life. Themysciran was not ordinary. The gods were not ordinary. Her life had not been an ordinary life. But in the second before she pushed the gate open, she loved this kitchen window with a love so sudden and so total she nearly wept. Then she felt him. He had not arrived yet. He was coming. He was half a mile away, perhaps, and approaching on the night air the way a stone approaches a window. Diana could feel the wrongness of him the way one felt a chord struck out of tune. He was very close. He was very fast. He was here. The garden gate at the other end of the lane creaked open. Diana did not look back. She vaulted her own gate, crossed the small lawn in 3 strides, and was at the kitchen door when she heard the front door of the cottage open behind her with a soft and deliberate sound. Not the cottage's front door, the front door of the lane. Footsteps on gravel. A voice that did not raise itself but slid through the air like a knife laid against a throat. She tried the kitchen door. It was unlocked. She pushed it open. The man with the glasses looked up. He saw her. He saw, Diana realized later, a tall woman in bronze and red and blue, with a coil of golden rope across her shoulder and a sword across her back, framed in his own doorway like a figure stepped out of a tapestry. He did not scream. He did not curse. He looked at her with the expression of a man who has been preparing his whole life for an impossible thing without knowing he was preparing for it, and was now, at the moment of its arrival, more relieved than afraid. "Take him," Diana said. The man did not understand. "What who? Take him upstairs." Diana was already moving. She held out her arms. "Give him to your wife. Tell her to barricade the door. He is here. He is in the lane. I will hold him." "Who are you?" "A friend," Diana said. Her voice did something to the room. It was a voice that had compelled gods. It had been trained on the Themysciran, where compelling was a kind of architecture, a careful raising of the voice's columns and arches until any listener stood inside a structure they could not refuse. The man with the glasses, James, she would learn his name was James, looked at her once more, and then he turned and ran for the stairs with the baby pressed against his chest. "Lily," he was shouting. "Lily, take Harry, it's him, take him and run." The front door opened. Diana turned. The man at the threshold was not, properly, a man any longer. He had a man's shape. He had a man's tall, narrow body and a man's pale hands, and a man's robe, black, vast, falling about him like a sail. But the face was wrong. The face was a long pale wedge with 2 slitted nostrils where a nose should have been and 2 red eyes where eyes should have been, and the mouth was thin and dry and full of an appetite that had eaten its own lips. The face had been a man's once, Diana thought, and the man had carved it slowly into this with every choice he had made for 40 years. He looked at her. She had expected surprise. She did not see it. She saw instead a slow narrowing, as if he were a hunter who had walked into a clearing expecting one quarry and found instead a second, larger one, and was already calculating the new arithmetic of the kill. "Step aside," he said. His voice was a hiss only by accident. It was in its proper register, calm and almost cultured. "I have not come for you. I know what you have come for," Diana said. "I am here to keep you from it. Then you will die first. Then I will die first." He raised his wand. Diana saw in that motion the cleanness of long practice. The wand had been in his sleeve, and now it was in his hand, and there had been no fumbling, no interval. He had killed often. He had killed enough that killing had become to him what writing was to other men, an act so familiar the body did it before the mind directed it. Avada Kedavra. The green light came out of him, the way a scream comes out of a wounded animal, sudden, total, complete in itself. Diana did not raise the lasso. the lasso was not for this. She raised her bracers instead, the bracers that had been forged by Hephaestus and tempered in the blood of Ares, and crossed them at her chest, and the green light struck them and split. It split into two long, thin sides of light and went past her, one to the left, one to the right, and shattered two panes of the kitchen window behind her. The man at the threshold paused. He did not gasp. He did not retreat. He recalculated. Diana could see the recalculation occurring behind his eyes the way one could see clouds moving behind a thin curtain. "Interesting," he said. He raised the wand again. This time he did not say the spell aloud. This time he simply willed it, and the green light came out of him in a different shape, wider, brighter, more terrible, and Diana, who had been preparing to deflect again, understood in the instant before it reached her that this one was not built to be deflected. This one was built to be consumed. She turned. She turned with all her training and all her speed and all her hopeless mortal immortal love, which was the kind of love an Amazon felt for a stranger's baby in a stranger's kitchen, because the lasso of Hestia had burned in her hand a day's flight ago and would not let her sit still. She turned, and she put her body between the green light and the staircase. She felt it enter her. It entered between her shoulder blades and went through her in a way that was both very cold and not cold at all. The way drowning is not properly wet. It was something her body had no category for, and her body, refusing to die quietly, reported it as a series of impossible sensations layered on top of one another. Cold, light, weight, music, the smell of her mother's hair, the taste of pomegranate, the particular tone of one of her sister's laughter when that sister had been 12. She did not fall at once. She had time. The gods, she would think later if there had been a later, were granting her this, a slow descent so that she could do what needed doing. She heard distantly James shouting upstairs. She heard distantly a woman screaming a child's name. She heard very near the man at the threshold making a small contented sound, the sound of a craftsman who has just completed a difficult piece of work. She heard the lasso uncoil from her shoulder. It did so without her telling it to. It did so the way a river leaves its banks during a flood, not because anyone told it, but because the laws governing it had changed in the last second. The lasso slid down her arm. It pooled on the floor. It moved, gold against the dark boards the way a snake moves, deliberate, with intention, with knowledge of where it was going. It went up the stairs. Diana, sinking now, found that she could still smile. She did not know if her face was still capable of it, but she felt the inside of the smile begin. Good, she thought. Go to him. The man at the threshold did not see the lasso. He stepped over her body. She felt the brush of his robe, and he climbed the stairs with the same calm rhythm he had used at the door. He had killed her without effort. He would now kill the rest of the household. He would kill the baby last, because that was the one he had come for, and because the killing of the baby was, to him, an act of state, a necessary piece of political theater performed for an audience he believed to be the universe. He reached the upper landing. He paused. Diana, with her dimming vision, could only see his boots from below, the boots in the trailing hem of the robe. A door splintered. A woman screamed, not Harry, please, not Harry, take me instead," and Diana, for the first time in her dying, understood with full Amazonian clarity that this woman, this mother, this Lily, was going to lay her body across her baby exactly as Diana had laid her own across the staircase. There were going to be two acts of love stacked between Voldemort's wand and the child tonight, and the second one was going to be a mother's. And Diana, who had crossed the veil because the lasso had burned, felt a thing very near awe that the universe, in its astonishing geometry, had arranged this redundancy. There was to be no possibility of failure. She had not been alone in coming for this child. The mother had been waiting too. The mother died. Diana heard it, a green light upstairs, a soft thump. She heard the man laugh then. The laugh was not loud. It was the laugh of a man who has just heard a small private joke at his own table. Then he said the words again, slower now, savoring them, performing them as he had imagined performing them for 16 years, and the baby cried, and the green light leapt from the wand. And the lasso, which had reached the baby's wrist by then, did what it was made to do. It told the truth, not in words. It was not yet a lasso that spoke in words. It would need years to teach the baby anything at all in words. It told the truth in being. The truth was this, that the child was loved. That two women had died in the last 40 seconds, because they loved this child more than they loved their own continuation. That a princess of the Amazons, sent by the goddess of the hearth, had crossed the veil of reality on this exact night for this exact reason. That a mother had refused to step aside even when offered her own life. That the air in this nursery was, at this instant, saturated with 2 layers of unconditional sacrificial love, which was, by the laws of every magic Diana had ever studied, the most dangerous substance in any universe. The killing curse struck the child. The child did not die. The curse rebounded, not the way a stone rebounds off a wall, but the way an insult rebounds off a person of unshakable self-knowledge. It went back into the man at the threshold of the nursery. It went back into him and through him and out of him. His body burst, very quietly, the way a paper lantern bursts when the candle inside it finally consumes its own substance. There was no scream. There was a small dry sound like a book closing. There was a smell of burning and a smell of ash and a smell, faint and not unpleasant, of incense, Hestia's blessing, Diana would have said, claiming back the wrongness that had stood in its temple room. The robe collapsed to the floor in a heap. The wand fell. Something thin and shadowy rose from the heap and looked, for one long disbelieving second, at the cradle. The shadow saw the baby. The shadow saw the lasso. The shadow understood in the immediate, hopeless, comprehensive way that shadows understand, that it had walked into something it had not prepared for. It made a sound, not a scream exactly, a kind of furious, frustrated keening, and then it fled out of the cottage and out of the village and out of the country and out of itself, and Diana, on the staircase below, dying, felt it pass through her in its escape and was almost amused by how thin it was. She had a moment longer. She used it. She turned her face with some difficulty toward the upper landing, and she pushed everything she had, every last reserve of warmth and purpose and Amazon discipline, up the stairs and through the broken door and across the nursery floor and into the lasso, into the rope of Hestia, into the bright gold loop now wrapped, faithfully and forever, around her child's small wrist. Keep him, she said without words, teach him. I cannot stay. The dying has begun, and I will not finish it cleanly, and I am sorry I could not bring him home to my mother. He would have been a good Amazon, but you stay. You stay and you teach him, and you tell him that he was loved on the night he should have died. You tell him that 2 women laid themselves down for him before he could speak his own name. You tell him, when he is ready to hear it, that he is mine as well as theirs, and that he must use you the way I would have used you, gently, 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 until gentleness is not enough, and then unflinchingly, and then again gently afterward, because gentleness afterward is what makes the unflinching part bearable. The lasso around the baby's wrist glowed once. It had heard. Diana smiled. She closed her eyes. She thought in the last second of her mother's terrace, and the sea breathing against the cliffs, and the cithara her sister played so badly, and she let herself go. Upstairs, the baby, Harry James Potter, 15 months old, orphaned twice in 3 minutes, stopped crying. He looked at the gold rope on his wrist. He looked at the dust of the man who had wanted to kill him. He looked at his mother, who lay very still on the floor and would not get up no matter how long he watched. He looked finally at the door, as if waiting for the woman in bronze and red and blue to come up and take him in her arms, which was the thing he most wanted in the world. The woman did not come. But the gold rope warmed against his wrist, and somewhere inside it, somewhere down inside the weave that Hestia herself had spun in a temple older than the war that had ended his family, a voice that was not exactly a voice said, I am here, little one. I am here. The baby, comforted by something he could not name, sucked his thumb. He waited. A long time later, an hour perhaps, nothing measured time properly in that house anymore. There were heavy footsteps on the path outside, and a giant of a man bent his head to come through the splintered front door, and from very far away, riding a flying motorcycle, a man named Sirius Black began the most useless flight of his life. The giant climbed the stairs and saw the dead mother and the live child and the gold rope on the live child's wrist, and the giant's enormous face crumpled, and he sat down on the floor in the wreckage of the nursery and cried for 10 minutes. Then he picked up the baby very carefully, as if the baby were a thing too precious to be entrusted to anyone but its own family, and he wrapped the baby in his coat, and he carried the baby out into the autumn night. The gold rope went with the baby. It would not be parted from him. The giant, who was named Rubeus Hagrid, tried once, only once, to lift it gently off the baby's wrist while the baby was sleeping in his arms on the motorcycle, because the rope had begun to glow softly and Hagrid did not want it noticed by muggles. The rope refused. Not by tugging, by simply being unmovable, the way the moon is unmovable, the way a true thing is unmovable. Hagrid looked at the rope. He looked at the baby. He thought in his uncomplicated way, whoever you belong to, miss, you belong to him now, and he flew on. On Themysciran, Hippolyta knelt that night in the temple of Hestia where her daughter had been a few hours ago. The altar was empty. She put her forehead to the cold marble and she did not weep, because Amazon queens did not weep in temples. They wept later in private, where the sea could absorb the sound. But she stayed a long time and she said into the marble, You took her. Very well, I gave her. But I gave her to purpose, Hestia, and you will see that purpose through. You will see that boy raised in truth. Do you hear me? You will see that boy raised in truth, or I will come for you, goddess, and I will come with the entire host of my line behind me, and we will pull you down out of your hearth, and we will put you on trial in your own ashes, and you know I will do it. You know I will." The fire on the altar flickered. It flickered perhaps in apology. It flickered perhaps in promise. It is difficult with goddesses to read these things, but it flickered, and Hippolyta took the flicker for what it was, and she rose from her knees, and she went to make the necessary arrangements for a daughter who would not be coming home. Far away, in a small suburban street, the giant set the baby gently on a doorstep. There was a tall, thin man with a silver beard, and a tall, thin woman with a tartan cape, and they argued in low voices about whether what they were doing was right, and they did not see, because they were very tired and very sad and very preoccupied, the gold rope coiled neatly inside the blanket like a sleeping creature. They did not see it because the lasso did not want to be seen. It had begun already, the long work of hiding itself, the long work of waiting, the long work of being the only mother now available to the orphan whose wrist it had bound itself to. In the second, Diana of Themysciran had died on the staircase below, holding the door against the dark. The tall, thin man set an envelope on the baby's blanket. He patted the baby once very softly on the forehead. He turned and walked away. The woman in the tartan cape walked with him. The giant followed. The street was quiet. The baby slept. The lasso warmed. A long way away, in a temple where the altar stone was still warm from a princess's last prayer, Hestia herself stood and looked down at what had happened, and she did a thing she had not done in 3,000 years. She bowed her head. She bowed her head for the daughter of Hippolyta, who had died not in glory and not in song and not in the proper Amazon manner. She had died on a staircase in a Muggle village in a world not her own, for a child who could not yet say her name. She bowed her head for the daughter of Hippolyta, and then she lifted her head again because the work was not done. The work, in fact, had just begun. The work had been laid in the wrist of a 15-month-old boy. The work was the truth. Coda to Chapter 1, The Hour Before Dawn. Some hours after Hagrid and the headmaster and the deputy headmistress had walked away down Privet Drive, leaving the baby on the doorstep with his letter and his blanket and his gold rope, a thing happened in the air above number 4 that did not register on any wizarding instrument and would not have been believed by any wizarding eye, because the wizarding eye, by long disuse, did not look in the direction the thing came from. The thing was a small wind. It was not a wind belonging to the autumn of southern England. It carried, in its small grain, the smell of olive smoke. It carried, in its smaller grain, the taste of salt water that had broken on a cliff somewhere a long way away. It came down out of the sky in a thin spiral and settled for a few seconds only, around the bundle on the doorstep. The blanket lifted very slightly at the corners. The hair on the baby's forehead stirred. The gold rope coiled inside the blanket brightened almost imperceptibly. The wind said something in a voice that had no actual sound to it that an alert listener might have rendered roughly as, "There you are. There you are, child. Good, good. We see you. We see you, and we will not forget you. We will sleep tonight, and we will wake tonight, and we will sleep again, and through it all we will be thinking of you. You will not be alone. You will never be alone. Do you hear us, child? Even in your sleep do you hear us?" The baby slept on. The wind, undiscouraged, said, "All right. We will not wake you. You will need your sleep. The sleep ahead of you is the most important sleep you will ever have. It is the sleep your guardian will use to begin her work. We are sorry that the work begins this way. We are sorry that we could not, in our universe, intervene from inside your own world. We had to send her, we had to send our princess, our daughter, our most cherished, across the veil, and the cost of that has been her life. We have paid the cost. We do not regret it. We have paid it for you, child, because the lasso burned in her hand and would not let her sit still, and because the burning of the lasso of Hestia in an Amazon's hand is, by our older law, an obligation that no Amazon and no queen of Amazons can refuse, even when the obligation costs the queen her only daughter. We hope, child, that you grow up worth her. We expect that you will. The lasso does not choose lightly. The wind continued for another few moments, and then thinned, and then was gone. The blanket settled, the baby breathed. The doorstep was quiet again. The street was quiet. The sky over Privet Drive returned to its mild, indifferent autumn dark. A long way away, in the temple of Hestia on the island of Themysciran, a queen who had decided not to weep in the temple stood up from her knees and went out into the courtyard, where her oldest captain was waiting with a small portable brazier and a cup of hot wine and a heavy wool cloak. The captain, Philippus, who had known the princess since the princess could walk, said nothing. She put the cloak around the queen's shoulders. She handed the queen the cup. The queen took the cup. The queen drank. After a long second, the queen said, "She is on the doorstep. She is, not she, the rope and the baby. He is on the doorstep of the mortals who will raise him. Are they good mortals? The queen considered. No, Philippus, they are not. They are small mortals. They are afraid of largeness. They will keep him small. They will try to keep him small anyway. The lasso, I think, will keep them from succeeding entirely. Then it is well enough. It is not well, Philippus. It is what we have. They are not what I would have wished for her son. He is her son, then. We are clear on that. The queen turned her face to her oldest captain. He is my grandson, Philippus. I am, from this moment, a grandmother. There has not been a grandmother in this line for 2 centuries. The grief of my daughter's death does not erase her son. The grief will live in me alongside the gladness of him. They will share the same chamber. I will be both at once. Yes, my queen, you are looking at me with that expression. What expression, my queen? The expression where you think I will collapse into the sea if you are not careful with me. I think you will collapse into the sea, my queen. I am being careful with you. I have known you a long time. Long enough, Philippus, to know that I will not collapse. Long enough to think it possible. Hippolyta laughed once. It was a small, bitter laugh, but it was a laugh. Very well, old friend. You may stand by me until the sun comes up. I will not require it. I will permit it. Sit, drink with me. We will name my daughter's small acts of courage tonight, the way her sisters will name them tomorrow, and the way her sisters' sisters will name them on the day of her formal commendation. We will name them privately. You and I, then we will sleep. Philippus sat. The 2 old women, for Hippolyta was old, in the Amazon sense of having lived a very long time and being very tired, drank a long, slow cup of wine together in the courtyard of the palace, and they named between them the small acts of courage of Diana of Themysciran. The acts were many. The naming took a long time. The wine ran out. They sent for another jug. The new jug was brought by a small acolyte who did not yet know that the princess had died across the veil. The acolyte would learn in the morning. Tonight she was permitted not to know. When the second jug was empty, the eastern sky was pale. Hippolyta stood. Philippus stood with her. They walked together back into the palace. At the door of the queen's chambers, Hippolyta turned. She said, Philippus, yes, my queen. I am a grandmother now. I will, from this morning, be a different sort of queen. There will be a child in my mind at all hours. He will be, I think, a quiet child. He will not be like our girls. He will be a boy in a mortal town with mortal parents who will not love him properly. He will be raised partly by a goddess's gift. He will speak our tongue, I think, before he speaks his own. He will dream of us. He will not, until he is much older, know that we are real. We will know that he is. We will follow him from here. We will watch. We will perhaps send small winds. We will perhaps do more. Whatever we do, we will not, you and I, ever speak of him to anyone outside this island in any way that lets him be found by his enemies. Do you hear me, Philippus? I hear you, my queen. Good. She turned. She went into her chambers. She did not weep even there, although the bed was empty in a way that beds are empty when a daughter who used to come in and sit on the foot of them is not going to do so again. She did not weep. She lay down. She slept. In Privet Drive, in the first thin light of November the 2nd, 1981, a woman in a dressing gown opened a front door and looked down at a baby with green eyes and a lightning scar, and the long career of Petunia Dursley as an unwilling and reluctant, and finally, astonishingly to herself most of all, partly successful aunt began. The lasso on the baby's wrist brightened in a manner so faint that only the baby could have felt it. The baby felt it. The baby did not have words yet for the feeling, but the feeling was, in some small way, the feeling of being known. It would be a long time before he would be known properly. It would be 11 years before he would, by his own actions in a hall full of strangers, be known to country. But the knowing had begun, on a doorstep, in a wind that had carried olive smoke, in a queen's old captain's hands on a queen's old shoulders. The hour before dawn passed, the morning came, the work began. Chapter 2, The Cupboard, the Coil, and the thing that could not be spoken of. Number 4, Privet Drive, was the sort of house designed by people who believed that a house was a kind of contract. Each detail had been negotiated. The lawn was the length the lawn next door was, plus or minus a thumb's width. The hedges were squared with a tool whose only purpose was to square hedges. The windows wore curtains the color of the curtains across the street, and the cars in the driveway were the model the cars 2 driveways down were, with one extra trim option for which Vernon Dursley had paid an additional sum, and which he mentioned, with great regularity, at the office. Into this house, in the November of 1981, a baby was deposited on the doorstep with no warning, no paperwork, and one envelope. Petunia Dursley found him. She had heard a sound on the step, milk bottles. She had assumed, irritably, the milkman had been getting careless, and she had opened the door in her dressing gown, intending to scowl, and instead she had looked down into a blanket and seen a child. She had known the child at once. She had known him because the eyes were Lily's eyes. They had been Lily's eyes from the day Lily was born. Petunia had been 4 years old and had stood on her toes to look into the cradle and had said, very clearly, "Her eyes are like mine but with the wrong color in them." And the family had laughed, and Petunia had loved her sister for exactly 19 months before the magic had come, and Lily had been chosen and Petunia had been left out, and a slow, steady winter had set in between them which had never broken into spring. She had known the eyes. She had also seen the lightning scar on the forehead, raw and pink and shaped like nothing in nature, and she had known what the scar meant, because Lily had written her a letter. "Toonie, I don't know what year you'll get this, I'll send it the safer way, but if anything happens we need to know there is somewhere for Harry." And Petunia had burned the letter and never answered it, but she had not been able to burn the memory of it. She had known also the rope. It was around the baby's wrist. It was gold. It was not the kind of gold one paid for in a shop. It was the kind of gold one might have seen, as a child, in a book of paintings of saints. It had a small light in it that pulsed when the baby breathed, and Petunia, who had spent her whole adult life teaching herself not to see things she did not want to see, found that this rope was the first thing in 2 decades she could not unsee no matter how hard she squinted. She had brought the baby in. She had set him on the kitchen table, on the blanket. She had read the envelope, in which a man whose name she remembered with cold dislike, Albus Dumbledore, had explained, in language as fastidious as it was insulting, that her sister was dead and that her sister's child had nowhere else, and that the protection she could afford the boy was, regrettably, vital. There was no apology in the letter. There was no condolence. There was an instruction dressed as a request. Petunia had read the letter twice. She had folded it. She had put it in the drawer where she kept the bills she did not intend to pay. She had stood for a long time with her hands flat on the kitchen counter, and she had not cried, because crying for Lily was something she had stopped allowing herself to do when Lily was 16 and had not yet died. She had simply stood there. Then she had reached out, very carefully, to take the gold rope off the baby's wrist. She could not. Her fingers passed through the air where the rope was. It was not that her fingers passed through the rope itself. It was that her fingers refused to arrive at the rope. They went around it. They moved past it. They could not, however willed, touch it. Petunia tried twice more with both hands, and her hands behaved like the hands of a person reaching for a thing in a mirror. She stood back. She looked at the rope. The rope looked back, in the way ropes do not look, but this rope very plainly did. Petunia opened her mouth. She intended to say, "Vernon, Vernon, come here. Vernon, look." What came out of her mouth was nothing. She tried again. Her tongue moved. Her breath moved. The words that should have come out, "There is a rope on the baby's wrist, Vernon," went somewhere between her throat and her teeth and dissolved, the way salt dissolves into water and leaves the water apparently unchanged. She tried to think about the rope. She could. She tried to plan to tell Vernon about the rope. She could. She tried to actually speak the sentence containing the rope. The sentence would not be spoken. Petunia sat down. She was a thin woman and she was not given to dramatic gestures, but she sat down at her own kitchen table with her sister's orphan on it, and she put her face in her hands, and she laughed once, very briefly, in something close to grief. "All right," she said into her hands, to no one she could name. "All right, have it your way, have it your way." The baby on the table looked at her with Lily's eyes and reached for the empty air, and the gold rope on his wrist glowed faintly and then quieted, and Petunia Dursley took her hands away from her face and stood up, and from that day onward never again attempted to remove or speak of the lasso of Hestia. What she did do was put the boy in the cupboard under the stairs. This was not, in her own internal accounting, an act of cruelty. It was an act of management. There were 2 bedrooms upstairs, the master and the small one. The small one would be Dudley's eventually, and an attic full of boxes and the cupboard. The cupboard had a light bulb and a mattress and a door that closed. It was the place she would have given a lodger if she had been the sort of woman who took lodgers. She could not place the boy in Dudley's eventual room because she had not yet acknowledged, even to herself, that the boy was staying. Putting him in the cupboard was a way of pretending he was still in transit. She told Vernon she had found a baby on the doorstep. She did not tell Vernon whose baby it was. Vernon, when shown the envelope, had read enough of the first sentence to identify the surname Potter, and had gone briefly red in the neck and white around the lips and had said, "Right, well, we'll do our duty, Petunia. We'll do our duty, but we won't make a song of it, and that business won't be mentioned in this house." And it wasn't. For 10 years it wasn't. Vernon Dursley meant by that business the entire phenomenon of magic. The Dursleys ran their house on a fiction, and the fiction was, there is no magic. The fiction was enforced rigorously. Anything that looked like magic was punished, until it could be made to look like coincidence. Anything that sounded like magic was punished, until it could be made to sound like nonsense. Anything that arrived in the post bearing strange seals was burned in the kitchen sink without being opened, unless Petunia, in some private corner of her grief, took it out of the sink first and put it in the drawer with the bills she did not pay. Harry grew under this regime. He grew slowly. He was small for his age. He was quiet, although he did not seem to be quiet from sadness. He was quiet the way some people are quiet, as a setting, a default condition of being. He had Lily's eyes. He had James's hair. He had a thin, pale face with a lightning-shaped scar on the forehead, which Petunia had taught him to keep covered with his fringe because the scar was, in her telling, an embarrassing birth defect from a car crash and would draw stares if shown. He had also the lasso. This was the thing nobody saw. The lasso, which the Dursleys never spoke of because they could not speak of it, was forever on Harry's wrist. It did not appear, however, on Harry's wrist. It appeared as a soft warmth, like a cuff of sun-warmed cotton, which Harry could feel and the rest of the world could not. When he reached for it, it would emerge under his fingers, a thread of gold that lengthened or shortened as his small mind asked it to, and when he stopped reaching it would soften again to a sleeve of warmth, hidden. Harry, who knew nothing else, took this to be ordinary. He had no comparison. He believed all babies were born with golden warmths on their wrists. He believed all babies could draw the warmth out into a string if they wished, and that all babies, holding the string, felt a presence which loved them. He felt that presence first when he was 11 months old in his new house and a half. He had woken in the cupboard in the dark, and the bulb above him had gone out. Vernon would replace it eventually, but had not yet, and the dark had pressed against him, and he had begun to cry, and the warmth on his wrist had stirred, and a voice that was not a voice had said, quite clearly from inside him, "Little one." Harry had stopped crying. He had been a small enough thing that the meaning of words had not yet attached itself to all his ears, but the meaning of the tone had attached. The tone said, "Here." The tone said, "Mine." The tone said, "Safe." He had reached out his small hand to the warmth and felt the rope come out of it, and he had held the rope across his chest, and he had slept. Over the next 4 years, this happened many times. The voice came and went. It did not say much. It did not, in those first years, say Diana or Themyscira or Hestia or any other word Harry would not have understood. It said small things. It said, "Little one, and I am here and sleep, and it is not your fault." It said these things at the appropriate times. When Dudley pushed Harry off a chair and Harry's lip began to bleed, the voice said, "It is not your fault, little one." When Petunia, in a thin, sharp temper, slapped Harry across the face for staring at her too long, the voice said, "It is not your fault, little one." When Vernon roared at Harry for tracking mud across the carpet, the voice said, "It is not your fault, little one," and added very softly, "But next time wipe your feet, little one, because you do not deserve to be roared at, and the way to be roared at less is to give him nothing to roar about." The lasso in those years was raising Harry the way a third grandmother might have raised him if a third grandmother had been hidden inside his wrist. Petunia watched this happen. She could not, by the curse of whatever law of magic the lasso had laid on her, speak of the lasso, but she could watch it. She watched it carry the boy through the worst of his small early sufferings. She watched the boy be, and this was what astonished her most, kind. He was a quiet child, but he was a kind one. When Dudley had a nightmare and screamed, Harry, 4 years old, padded out of the cupboard in the dark and stood by the staircase and worried, until Petunia, coming down for water, saw him there and snapped at him to get back in his bed. When the milkman came with a cut on his hand, Harry, 6 years old, brought a clean tea towel from the airing cupboard without being asked. When Vernon's mother visited and brought her bulldog, which terrorized the cat from down the lane, Harry, 8 years old, sat with the cat in the back garden until the cat would let itself be touched again. He should not have been a kind child. He was a child being raised in a cupboard by people who disliked him on principle. The household had been engineered, however unconsciously, to produce a small, bitter person. It had produced, instead, a small, steady one. And Petunia, who had been the unkind one in her own girlhood, the one who said the cruel thing because saying the cruel thing felt, for half a second, like power, Petunia watched her sister's son and knew, with the particular certainty of a woman who had once known her sister well, that this was Lily's doing. Lily had laid some last act of love into the child, and the act had taken. Petunia, watching the boy be kind, sometimes had the sensation that her sister was in the kitchen with her, that Lily, dead now 8 years, was standing at the kitchen sink with her hand on Harry's hair, and that the sink and the hand and the hair were the realest things in the room. She did not let the sensation show. She gave the boy short rations and a cupboard and a long list of chores because she did not know how else to be. But she did not, in those years, ever quite manage to hate him. She tried. She told herself stories about how he was a burden, about how he had been forced on her, about how her own son was being eclipsed in some ineffable way by this small, quiet alien. The stories did not stick. the eyes did not let them stick. The eyes were Lily's eyes, and Lily had been her sister, and Petunia, however hardened, had not been hardened all the way through. The lasso, for its part, watched Petunia. It made certain calculations. It noted, for instance, that Petunia did not speak of Harry's parents, but kept a photograph of her sister in the bottom of her dressing table drawer. It noted that Petunia, when serving Harry his meals, served him portions slightly smaller than Dudley's, but not so much smaller that the boy went hungry. It noted that Petunia, on Harry's birthday, gave him no present at all, but on the night of his birthday cooked a particular dish, a chicken pie of a specific brand, with a specific kind of pastry, which Lily had also loved when Lily had been a girl, and that Petunia served this pie at dinner with no acknowledgement whatsoever, and that Petunia ate her own portion with her face turned slightly away from her family, looking at the kitchen window, where the reflection of the lit room was overlaid on the dark of the back garden. The lasso, which by now was capable of distinguishing many shades of human truth, identified this dish as Petunia's annual private requiem for her sister. It noted the requiem. It did not tell Harry. Some things the lasso had begun to learn were not yet for Harry to know. Some things would be for Harry to know when Harry was 9 or 10 or 11 or older. The lasso was patient. The lasso had time. What it did for now was teach the boy what could be taught at the appropriate ages. By 2, Harry had a name for the warmth on his wrist, which was simply lass. He did not know it as a word. He knew it as a feeling. He would touch his wrist when he was afraid and say lass to himself in a small voice, and the warmth would answer. By 3, the warmth had begun, sometimes, to murmur back, not in sentences, in something more like the soft thrumming a cat makes against a child's chest, a sound that was the auditory shape of safety. By 4, the murmuring had words in it sometimes. Brave boy, steady boy, there. By 5, Harry could draw the warmth out of his wrist whenever he wished and use it as a kind of toy. He played with it in the cupboard. He made shapes of it. He made a small rope to climb on in his head, and the rope would oblige. He could feel the rope take his weight, although his body did not actually leave the mattress. He understood in some small dim way that the rope was a friend. He did not yet understand in any way at all that the rope was a goddess's gift, or that the rope had been bound to him by a princess on the night his mother died. He did, however, dream. The first proper dream came on his 5th birthday. It came on the night Petunia had served chicken pie. Harry, full for the first time in months, had gone to sleep in the cupboard with his small, thin body curled around the warmth on his wrist, and he had dreamed. He had dreamed of an island. The island was white at its edges, white stones, white cliffs, and green at its center, and the sea around it was the kind of blue Harry, who had only ever seen the sea once on a damp August day in Bognor Regis, did not know the sea was capable of. The sea breathed. He could hear it. The sea breathed the way Harry's own chest breathed, slowly, patiently, without urgency. There was a woman on the island. She was very tall. Harry had no words for what she wore. It was the color of fire and the color of the sky and the color of warm metal. She had black hair braided down her back. She had a face that Harry, looking at it, knew at once was the kindest face that had ever looked at him. She knelt down in front of him. She was much taller than he was, even kneeling. She was about Vernon's height, even kneeling. She put both of her hands very gently against his cheeks. They were warm. They were calloused, but the calluses were on the back of her hands as well as the palms, which was peculiar to him because Petunia's calluses were only on the palms. "Hello, little one," she said. "It has taken me 5 years to be allowed to come and see you. I'm sorry I'm late." Harry did not know what to say. He was 5 years old. He did not have many things to say to tall, warm strangers. He said, "Are you lass?" She laughed. The laugh was the most extraordinary sound Harry had ever heard. It was the sound he had been quietly aching for without knowing it since he could remember. "Yes," she said, "I am lass. My name is Diana. I want to teach you many things, little one. We have a lot of time. Tonight is only for hello." Harry put his arms around her neck. She did not flinch. She did not stiffen. She gathered him up. She held him the way Petunia had never held him, the way Vernon would have died before holding him, the way Dudley would not have known how to hold him. She held him with her whole self, as if his weight was the only thing in the world worth holding. And she held him for a long time, and after a while he understood that the warmth he had felt on his wrist for all his short life was this woman, and that this woman, dreamed or not, was, by some impossible arithmetic he was too young to do, his. "Are you my mum?" he said into her neck. She did not lie. The lasso of Hestia, even in her hands, did not allow her to lie, although she could have chosen many words. "I am the woman who has been keeping you while your mum has been away," she said. "Your mum is not here, little one. Your mum loved you very much. She and your father both. They cannot come, but they sent me in their place to be near you. I am a friend. I am a kind of mother also, while you need one. Will you let me?" Harry, who was 5 years old and had had no one's arms around his shoulders in any way for as long as he could remember, said, "Yes." The dream lasted in dream time for about an hour. Diana, though Harry, in the dream and out of it, would call her lass for years yet, taught him a small song. The song was in a language he did not know but understood, because in dreams understanding is given for free. It was a song about the sea and a small fish that was afraid of the gulls until the moon told it the gulls were also afraid of something, and so on, until the song had named all the fears in the sea and had laughed at each of them. Harry sang it back to her in his small piping voice. He had a good ear. She nodded, pleased. When he woke in the cupboard in the dark, he could still hear the sea. He sat up. The bulb above him had been replaced. Vernon had replaced it months ago, but he did not turn it on. He sat in the dark and listened. There was no sea. Privet Drive had no sea. There was only the breathing of the house, the refrigerator, the distant clock, Dudley snoring 2 floors up. But there was on his wrist the warmth, and the warmth was ever so faintly smiling. "I am here, little one," it said. "I told you I would be here." Harry in his cupboard in the dark said aloud in the small piping voice he had used in the dream, "Hello, lass." The warmth answered him. He went back to sleep, and from that night on the world had a center for him. He was no longer a boy in a cupboard. He was a boy with a person, even if the person was, in some way he did not have the words for, hidden inside his wrist. The Dursleys could starve him, ignore him, shout at him, deny him birthdays. They could not unmake the fact that someone somewhere on an island made of white stone and breathing sea had knelt in front of him on his 5th birthday and called him little one and meant it. He went on growing. He grew quieter in some ways, more inward, more private, and louder in others, with a kind of inner gladness that the Dursleys, watching him from across the breakfast table, found inexplicable and irritating. Petunia, who had not been able to speak of the lasso for 5 years, and who was therefore unable to discuss any of this with Vernon, watched her sister's son acquire a contentment she could not explain and could not interfere with, and she felt a small sour pang of pride, which she immediately suppressed because the pride was an admission, and she could not yet make admissions. The lasso slept on Harry's wrist. The lasso would wake fully when Harry was older. There were still many things to teach him, and many years left in which to teach them, but a beginning had been made. A beginning, the lasso would have said if it had spoken aloud, was the only thing that mattered. The rest was time. Hestia in her temple half a universe away, agreed. Interlude to Chapter 2. 3 small scenes from the cupboard year's eye. He was 3 when he learned the word spider, and he learned it from a spider. There was one in the cupboard. It had been there before he had been there. It was by the time he was 3, a fat old garden spider with a small efficient web in the upper left corner of the cupboard's slanting ceiling, and Harry, who at 3 was a creature of small absorbing curiosities, had taken to watching it for great stretches of the mornings when Petunia was busy with Dudley and the kitchen and the postman. The spider's name, as far as Harry was concerned, was Lass, which at that point was also the name of the warmth on his wrist, and the name he applied indiscriminately to everything in his small life he loved. The warmth on his wrist had not yet, by then, objected to the duplication. Diana had not yet learned how to laugh at his small confusions, that came later, for now she simply allowed him his use of the word. The first proper exchange he had with the spider went, in his own internal account, something like, "Lass, do you eat the flies?" The spider had not answered. "Lass," Harry had said, "Lass, why don't you talk to me?" The warmth on his wrist had answered, on behalf of the spider. "The spider is not the same lass as I am, little one. The spider is a different creature. She does not talk in the way that you and I talk. She talks with her web. Look at her web. She has told you on her web several things this morning. She has told you that there is a fly in the corner. She has told you, with the holes in the web, that she ate 3 flies last night. She has told you that she is going to spin a new patch tomorrow, because the wind from the cupboard door comes through the upper part of the web on the days your aunt opens the door for a long time. The spider talks, little one. You only have to learn her language. Oh, it is, by the way, a very interesting language. It is older than the language of mortals. It is, among other things, older than the language of gods. Spiders were on this world before either. Older than you, lass, much older. I am 8,000 years old, give or take, and a spider's first ancestor was 80,000 times older than me when I was born. There are many such things in your world, little one. Spiders, stones, stars, things that were before us, things that will be after us. You will, as you grow, learn to give them the respect they deserve for being older than you. The spider had then, with admirable timing, descended on a single line of silk to the level of Harry's nose and inspected him for a long, polite moment before returning to her web. Harry had been astonished. She came down to look at me. Yes, Diana had said. Spiders are not as blind as your people think. She knows you. You have been here many days. You are, in her view, a fellow occupant of the cupboard. She is being neighborly. From that morning, Harry had begun, in a small, slow way, to be a person who noticed and respected the small things. The spider had been the first. Over the next years there would be others. The milkman's old half-blind dog, who hated everyone but waited for Harry on Tuesdays. The cat from down the lane who let Harry, and only Harry, lift her by her belly. The wood pigeon who lived on the chimney of number 6 and who, every morning of every summer for 6 years, said his 3 soft notes to Harry through the cupboard window. They were not Harry's friends, exactly in any sense Harry's friends would later be friends. They were, however, Harry's neighbors. He had a great many neighbors he did not have words for. The lasso on his wrist had taught him to take them all seriously. Roman 2. He was 4 when he had his first proper run-in with Dudley over a toy. It was a small plastic dinosaur, green, of unconvincing anatomy, that Vernon's sister Marge had given to Dudley for Christmas, and which Dudley had ignored for 9 months, until the morning he had come into the lounge to find that Harry had taken the dinosaur from the toy box, and was sitting cross-legged on the carpet making it walk along the edge of the rug. Dudley had screamed. Vernon, who had been reading the paper, had risen. What had followed had been the standard procedure of the Dursley household. Vernon shouting at Harry, who was 4, looking up with his small still face, Petunia in the kitchen, pretending not to hear Dudley on the carpet, performing the larger and larger collapses of grief that had become his trademark. Harry had given the dinosaur back. He had been told to go to the cupboard. He had gone to the cupboard. In the cupboard in the dark he had cried very quietly, the way he had learned to cry, with his hands over his mouth. The warmth on his wrist had said, "Little one, yes, lass, that was not in any sense your fault. The dinosaur was being ignored. You played with it well. He took it back not because he wanted it, but because you wanted it. That is one of the patterns of the world you must learn. There are people who want only what other people want. They are in some way the saddest of people. They have never quite been told that their own wanting is real and is enough. They have been taught to think that wanting is for other people to do, and that they must take what other people want in order to feel like other people. Your cousin is such a person. Your aunt and your uncle are making him into such a person. They are doing it without intending to. They are doing it by always giving him what he asks for and never asking him what he himself wants. He has never been asked what he himself wants. He does not know. He probably did not want the dinosaur. He only wanted you not to have it. Harry had thought about this for a long time. He had said, Can I help him, lass?" The warmth had, Harry would remember this, said nothing for a moment. The not saying had been a kind of taking stock. Then the warmth had said, "That little one is the largest question a person can ask. The largest and the bravest and the most often answered wrong. You are 4. The honest answer is, you can probably not help your cousin become a different person while you live in this house. You are not strong enough, you are not old enough, he is not interested in being helped. What you can do is not return his cruelty. What you can do is be beside him, a person who does not want what he wants. What you can do is be the example. The example will not perhaps save him. Examples often do not save anyone. But the example will at the least keep you whole, and will perhaps give him a thing to wonder about when he is older. That is the best you can do, little one. You cannot heal him. You can be beside him what he might have been." Oh, Harry had said. He had sat in the dark and thought about this. After a time he had said, "Lass, that is a sad answer. Yes, little one, many of the answers are sad. They are still true." Roman 3. He was 5.5 that summer between the first dream of the place and the dream where Diana told him about his mother, when Mrs. Figg of all people gave him a book. Mrs. Figg lived 4 houses down. She had 7 cats. She smelled faintly of cabbage. The Dursleys, when they had errands to run that Harry could not be brought along on, would deposit Harry at Mrs. Figg's house with a brusque request for several hours of free childcare. Mrs. Figg accepted every time with a vague, benevolent vagueness which the Dursleys took for senility, and which Harry had long since worked out was carefully constructed. He had, by 5.5, identified Mrs. Figg as a member of a category he did not yet have a name for, which was adults who knew more about him than they were telling. He had not asked her about it. He had, Diana said with approval, chosen to wait until she chose to bring it up. The day she brought it up was a Thursday in late August. The Dursleys were at the seaside. Harry had been left, as usual, with Mrs. Figg for the afternoon. Mrs. Figg had made him a cup of weak tea with 3 sugars and a plate of plain biscuits, and had sat him in her parlor in the chair next to the window where the sun fell across the carpet in a particular pattern that the cats favored. The cats had one by one come in to look at him and to settle along the chair's edges and on the rug at his feet. Mrs. Figg had said after a while, "Harry, dear, "Yes, Mrs. Fig. I'd like to give you something." She had stood up with the slow, careful slowness of an old woman, and she had gone to a cabinet at the back of the parlor, and she had taken from it a small book wrapped in a piece of brown paper. She had brought it back. She had laid it on the arm of his chair. "Open it after I go to the kitchen, dear. I'll be making more tea." She had gone. Harry had unwrapped the book. It had been a small old hardback, faded green with gold lettering on the spine. The lettering had said, "Stories from the Greek." Harry had opened the book. He had read the first page. The first page had been the table of contents. The contents had included the story of Theseus and the Minotaur, the story of Perseus and the Gorgon, the story of Heracles and his 12 labors, the story of Atalanta and the hunt, the story of the women of an island called Themysciran, who were warriors and lived alone and were the daughters of the goddess of war. Harry had stopped at this last entry. He had sat very still. He had looked at the page for some time. He had said inwardly, "Lass," the warmth on his wrist had said, "Yes, little one. The book has my place in it. Yes, it is real. It is real outside my dreams. People know about it. They have written it in books. Some people know small old stories about it. Yes, little one. The Themysciran has been visited very rarely by sailors who lived to tell about it. The sailors went home and told their stories. The stories went into books. The books were preserved. Some, like this one, have survived to your time. It is not perhaps exactly the place I have shown you. It has been turned into legend. But the core of it, yes, real. Real and on your world, somewhere, although the gods have moved it in space-time so that mortals cannot find it without invitation." Harry had then, with great care, read the whole book in one sitting. He had read it twice, in fact, because Mrs. Fig's tea ran out and she had had to send to the corner shop for more, and the trip and the tea brewing had taken almost 2 hours, and Harry had had nothing else to do. He had read every word. He had read, in particular, the chapter about the Themysciran twice over. When Mrs. Fig had come back with the second pot, she had set it on the table, and she had looked at the boy in the chair, and she had said, in a different voice than the one she had been using all afternoon, "Did you like the chapter about the warrior women, Harry?" Harry had looked at her. He had said evenly, "How did you know I would, Mrs. Fig?" She had smiled. She had a different smile when she was not pretending to be vague. He had not seen it before. It was a quiet, knowing smile. She had said, "Oh dear, I had a feeling, that's all. You strike me, as the sort of boy who would have an interest in such places. Many boys do. I had it as a girl myself. Have you, Mrs. Fig, have you been there? To Themysciran? No, dear. No, not as far as anyone I know of has been. But I had let us say, I had a brother once who was friends with a woman who said she had. The woman was not quite well, as people would have put it then, but she said it with a certain conviction. She said the women there were kind to her. She said one of them gave her a small object, a coin or some such, and the coin lived in our family for some years. It was lost, eventually, by my uncle in the Second War. We thought of it often." Harry had looked at her. He had said very quietly, "Mrs. Fig, do you know what is on my wrist?" Mrs. Fig had looked at his wrist. She had said after a long second, "I see something there, dear. I have always seen something there. I had thought, at first, it was a kind of light. I never could quite put my finger on it. I have not spoken of it to your aunt. I would not. I think it does you good, dear. Whatever it is, I do not need to know. I'm pleased you have it." She had set the teapot down. She had patted the cushion next to her. The largest of the cats had jumped into her lap. She had said, "Keep the book, dear." He had kept it. He had hidden it inside his cupboard between the mattress and the wall where Petunia did not look. He had read it many times in the next 5 years. It had been for many years the only book he owned. He had memorized the chapter about the Themysciran. He had recited it in his head on long, boring afternoons when Vernon had had visitors and Harry had been instructed to be invisible. He had, in some small way, lived on it. When he had finally gone to Hogwarts, he had taken the book with him. It had sat on his bedside table in the Gryffindor dormitory, between the small framed photograph of his parents Hagrid had given him and the small glass of water he kept for the night. Ron had picked it up once and had looked at it and had said, "Harry, what's this old thing?" And Harry had said, "A book about a place I love," and Ron had set it back down and never asked again. Mrs. Fig, in her parlor in Privet Drive, would live to be 93. She would come in 1996 to a small ceremony at Hogwarts at which she would be presented, by Albus Dumbledore, with a quiet medal for unobtrusive courage in the maintaining of a watching brief over the boy who lived for a decade. She would, on the way out, embrace Harry briefly, a small, awkward, smelling of cabbage embrace, and would whisper into his ear, in the voice of the day she had given him the book, "I am very pleased it worked out, dear." He would say, "I am also very pleased, Mrs. Fig." She would die in her sleep in 1997. Harry would attend the funeral. So would Diana in her way in the warmth on his wrist, which would, throughout the service, glow with a soft, slow gladness that Harry alone would feel. Chapter 3: The Themysciran Years, 5 to 7. What follows is a series of small portraits from the years Harry Potter was small. They are not chronological in the strict sense. The lasso did not teach in lines but in spirals, but each one took place between his 5th birthday and his 8th, and each one mattered later in ways that, at the time, neither Harry nor the woman who taught him could have entirely foreseen. The dreams settled into a pattern. 3 nights of every 7, Harry slept in the cupboard and woke on the island. He had begun to call the island the place. He did not yet know it was called Themysciran, and Diana, who out of long Amazon caution did not yet use her own name with him either, was content to leave the place nameless. The place had a name in the boy's mouth, and the name was simply the place, and the place was where Lass was, and that was sufficient. The place was always the same and always different. The cliffs and the sea were constant. The light could be morning or evening. The season could be a hot, dry summer with cicadas in the olive grove, or a wet, warm spring with frogs in the spring pools. The place was always populated by exactly 2 people, Harry and Diana, although Harry, looking through doorways or down corridors of the White Palace where they walked, sometimes felt that other people were just out of sight, watching the way the women of a family watch a new infant through the doorway without entering the room. He asked once if there were others. "There are many others," Diana said. "They are my sisters and my mother and my aunts. They cannot come and meet you. They are far away. But they know about you, little one. They know you exist. My mother in particular wishes me to tell you that she is glad you exist. She says you are her grandson, although the word is not entirely accurate. She will accept no correction." Harry thought about this. Do they live on the place? They live in a place very like this. It is not exactly the same place. It is, call it the next island over. Easier so. When can I meet them? Diana hesitated. When you are older, little one. When you are ready. When you can hold the sea in your hands without dropping it. I will know when. Now sit. We have lessons. She had built him a small olive-wood bench in front of a small stone table, and on the table that day, she had placed 7 figs and a small glass cup of cool water. Harry in the dream was always exactly 5 years old when he arrived at the table. In the waking world he grew slowly, but in the place he was the age he had been when the dreaming began. Diana had explained this to him on the second visit. "Time is not the same here," she had said. "Your body is in your bed in the cupboard. Your body is growing. But in this place you are 5, because that is where we began, and I do not want to rush you. There is no need to grow faster here than you grow there. We have time, little one, we have time." Tonight he sat and ate the figs and drank the water, and Diana, sitting opposite him on her own bench, her long legs folded beneath her, said gently, "Tonight we begin moral judgment." Aye. Moral judgment in the Amazon style, Harry would later understand, was not what other children learned. It was not do this, do not do that. It was older than that and more careful. It began with the proposition that a person was a creature standing at a moment, and that every moment offered them choices, and that the choices were not always between good and bad, sometimes between 2 goods, sometimes between 2 bads, sometimes between something that looked good and something that was good. Diana set out the propositions slowly, one at a time, the way one might set out smooth stones on a wet bank for a child to skip. She did not lecture. She told stories. "Listen, little one, there was once a woman who lived near a river. The river was wide and brown and full of fish. She had a small son. He had a friend. The friend was the son of a woman she did not like. One day the 2 children were playing on the bank and the friend fell in. The woman saw him fall. The water was carrying him away. She had a long stick in her hand and she could have reached the stick to him, but she stood still, holding the stick. She did not move." "Tell me, little one, why she did not move." Harry chewed his fig, because she did not like his mum. Yes, but what was she thinking while she stood still with the stick? Harry considered. She was thinking it was not her job. She was thinking, if I don't do anything, nobody can blame me. She did not push him in, he just fell. If she does not save him, she did not kill him. It was the river. Yes, Diana said. That is what she was thinking. Tell me, was she right? Harry frowned. He thought about it for a long time. He was 5 years old and the place was very still, and Lass was waiting, and he understood in some dim way that he was being trusted with a real question, the kind of question Petunia and Vernon never asked him because they thought him too small for such questions. She was wrong, he said at last. She had the stick. The stick was there. The stick was in her hand. If she does not put the stick out, she chooses. She chooses for the boy to go under. She does not push him, but she chooses. Diana smiled. Yes, little one, that is the first lesson. A person with a stick in their hand is responsible for what they do with the stick. A person who does not move when they could have moved has moved. There is no neutrality, little one. There is only choice. Even silence is a choice. Even standing still is a choice. We do not get to say, I did nothing, and mean it innocently. We did something. We did the not thing. And the not thing has a name, and the name has a weight, and we carry that weight. Harry thought about Vernon, who sat at the breakfast table while Dudley pinched him under the table and never spoke. Vernon holding a stick. Vernon not moving. Lass, he said, what if the stick is small? What if you can't reach? What if reaching gets you in the river too? Diana's smile deepened. Ah, little one, that is the next lesson, and it comes much sooner than I had planned. Yes, sometimes the stick is too small. Sometimes reaching gets you in the river. You must learn, and this will take you many years, and you will not always learn it well, when the river will take you and when it will not. You must learn when to wade and when to shout for help. You must learn when to throw stones at the river to slow it. You must learn when to lie down on the bank and weep, because there are days when the river is the river, and you cannot save the friend, and there is no shame in weeping for him as he goes past. But Harry began. But Diana said gently, you do not get to use the river was too strong as an excuse for the days when the river was not too strong. You must learn the difference. The difference is the work of a life, little one. It is what we are here to teach you. She picked up the last fig from the plate, broke it in half, gave one half to him, and ate the other. Aye. Truth discernment came next. Diana introduced it on a different night, perhaps the 7th time Harry had come to the place, perhaps the 10th, he could not always remember. She did it lightly, the way one teaches a small child to ride a bicycle, by walking alongside. When a person tells you a thing, she said, you have always 2 questions to ask. Do you know what they are? Harry shook his head. The first question is the thing true? The second question is, does the person who said it believe that it is true? He frowned. Aren't they the same? No, little one, they are very different. A person can say a thing that is true while believing it is false. Then the person is a liar, but the world is still as the person said. A person can say a thing that is false while believing it is true. Then the person is honest, but the world is not as the person said. Both happen often. The 4 combinations matter, and you must learn to feel them apart, the way you learn to feel an apple from a pear in the dark. Harry, in his small 5-year-old way, said the 4 combinations to himself a few times. He liked the rhythm of it. True and they think it's true. True and they think it's false. False and they think it's true. False and they think it's false. That last one is the one to be most careful of, Diana said, because it is the only one where the speaker is both lying and wrong. They have set out to deceive, and they have also failed to know what they are doing. Such a person is dangerous, little one, not because they are clever, but because they are not. They will hurt you while not even understanding they have done so. They are the worst kind. Watch for them. They are everywhere. She paused. She picked up her cup of water and set it down again. Now, the lasso, little one, you have it on your wrist. You will have it, I hope, for the rest of your life. The lasso has a power that is the simplest power in the world and the most terrible and the kindest. The lasso compels truth. If a person is bound by it, the person speaks what they believe to be true. If they try to speak what they do not believe, what they think is a lie, the lasso prevents the words from forming. Their throat closes. Their mouth refuses. They feel, I am told, a kind of bright pressure like a hand on the chest. They cannot lie. They can still be wrong, you understand. The lasso does not make them correct. It only makes them sincere. Harry thought about this. Lass, that is very useful. She laughed. Yes, very useful. Also very dangerous, little one. To compel another person's sincerity is a heavy thing. A person has the right to their privacy. A person has the right to small, kind lies. Have you ever told a small, kind lie? Harry thought. Aunt Petunia asked if I broke a plate that Dudley broke. I said I broke it, because Dudley would have got into trouble. That was not exactly a kind lie. That was a lie to protect Dudley. Yes, why? Harry struggled with this, because Aunt Petunia would shout at him. She shouts very loud at him sometimes, and he cries. He shouts at me when I cry, but he cries too when she shouts, so I said I did it. I got shouted at instead. Diana looked at him for a long second. Then she said very gently, that was in fact a kind lie, among other things. You took a small harm onto yourself to save another person a larger one. The world is not a simple place, little one. There are days when the kind thing is to lie and the cruel thing is to tell the truth. The lasso will not punish you for those lies. It will respect them. Do you understand? Harry nodded slowly. He did not entirely understand, but he was beginning to. Listen, Diana said. The lasso is for the larger lies, the lies that kill, the lies that bind, the lies that send wars, the lies that make a man with a stick stand still while a child drowns. Those are the lies the lasso is for. You will not use it on a small boy who has broken a plate. You will not use it on a tired ant who has snapped at you. You will use it only, and this is a promise I will ask of you, little one, only on those whose lies are doing real harm. Do you promise? Harry in the place on his bench with the figs in the cup looked up at her. I promise, lass. The lasso around his wrist in the waking world and around his small 5-year-old wrist in the dream glowed. It heard the promise. It bound the promise. The promise was now part of how Harry would later be a person. IV. Greek came in slowly. He did not know at first that he was learning Greek. He thought he was learning what Diana spoke. Diana in the place did not speak English with him at first. She spoke a soft, fluid, older language whose meanings reached him in the way dream meanings reach, directly without translation. After many nights it occurred to Harry in the dream to ask, "Lass, what language are we speaking now?" She seemed pleased. "Ah, you have noticed. We are speaking a very old language. It was my first language, little one. It is the language of my people. The Greeks of your world speak something descended from it. It is something like their oldest texts, but older. We will keep speaking it here, you and I, so that you learn it. Outside, you speak English, of course. But here between us we will speak the oldest tongue I know. Is that all right? Yes, lass. You may also call me by my proper name if you wish. Diana." He tried it. "Diana. Yes, is lass not your proper name? Lass is a name you gave me, little one. I like it. I will answer to it always. But Diana is my name, or in this language, Delta Yod Alpha Nu Alpha. Diana," he repeated. He had a good ear. By his 6th birthday in the waking world, he had a small working vocabulary of Dream Greek. By his 7th, he could read it. Diana had taught him to write, in the place, with a small reed pen on a small wax tablet, and he could recite the alphabet, and he could puzzle out a sentence from her if she wrote it. He had no books in Privet Drive, but he had his cupboard wall, and on the wall in chalk that he would carefully wipe away before morning, he sometimes wrote his lessons, Greek nouns, Greek verbs, the names of muses and gods. The Dursleys, who did not enter his cupboard, never saw the wall. The Amazon training positions came in slowly also. Diana did not at first try to teach Harry to fight. He was 5, he was small, he was inside a dream. There would be time later, and her own training had begun much later, although that had been on Themysciran, where children's bodies were not the only resource. What she taught him, in the years between 5 and 7, was how to stand. "Stand here," she would say, and place him on a flat stone in the courtyard. "Now, weight on the balls of your feet, knees soft, hips loose, shoulders down, crown of the head up, yes, like that. Now imagine a thread from the top of your head to the sun, and the sun is pulling you gently up. Do you feel it? Now do not lift your feet from the stone. Just be tall, be very tall, little one, be the tallest thing on this island." Harry on the stone would stretch. He liked this game. It made him feel that he had a body, which was a small, remarkable thing, because in Privet Drive he had spent most of his life being told to make his body smaller, out of sight, out of the way, out of the kitchen, out of the lounge, out of the way of Dudley's friends. "Good. Now drop your right shoulder 1 inch, just the shoulder. Keep everything else still. Yes, now lift it. Now your left, now both, now neither. You see, your shoulders are not your whole body. They are themselves. You can move them by themselves. Now your hips, just the hips, just the right hip forward 1/2 inch. Now back. Now your weight onto your left foot only. Now onto your right, now centered." The lesson would go on like this for what felt like an hour. By the end, Harry would be sweating in the dream and waking in his cupboard somewhat tired in his small limbs and unable to explain why, except that he had been practicing in his sleep. Diana called these the stances. There were 12 of them, then 36, then 108. By his 7th birthday, he knew the 12. He could move from one to the next without thinking, in the courtyard in the dream. He had not yet been taught to do anything with the stances, to strike, to dodge, to throw, to take a fall. The stances were the alphabet. There were words later. There were sentences much later. There were stories, duels, battles, dances, only after one had spent years learning the letters. He did not know it then, but the stances were doing something to his waking body as well. He was developing, very quietly, the small balance and the small precision of a child who had been taught to know where his weight was. He moved through Privet Drive without bumping into things. He could step on the creaky stair on the way out of the cupboard without making it creak. He had learned, by the time he was 6, exactly which of his feet had to land where. The Dursleys did not notice this, because the Dursleys did not look at him often. But Mrs. Figg, who lived down the road and was the only person on Privet Drive who looked at him at all, said one day to him as he was helping her carry her shopping, "You move like a dancer, dear. You ever do any dancing?" Harry had said number he had thought about it after. He had said to the warmth on his wrist that night, "Lass, is what we do dancing. It can be dancing," Diana had said. "All movement is dancing if the movement is done in the right spirit. Yes, little one, we are dancing. We are dancing very, very slowly, and the music has not yet begun. But yes, we are dancing, vi. There was a particular dream, perhaps Harry was 6.5, that he remembered for the rest of his life. He had come to the place that night and found Diana waiting for him at the edge of the cliffs. She was looking out at the sea. She did not turn when he came up beside her. He took her hand. They stood for a while like that, watching the water move and not move, the way it always did. "Little one," she said at last, "tonight I want to tell you about your mother." Harry's small chest tightened. "You have a mother." Her name was Lily. She was, by all accounts, beautiful, although you must not take a stranger's word for that. She had your eyes, although in fact you have her eyes, that is the proper order. She was loved by many people. 2 boys, when she was a girl, loved her with the kind of love boys have when they are too young to know what to do with the love. One of those boys became your father. His name was James. The other boy became something else, and we will talk about him another night. Tonight is for your mother. Harry held her hand tighter. Your mother died for you, little one. He had known this in some way. He had known it with the half-knowing of a child who has overheard a phrase whose meaning he cannot yet fully parse. He had heard Petunia say once in a sharp, careless voice, "The boy's mother died," and he had taken that as information without understanding what it meant. Now in the place by the cliffs with Diana, the phrase "died for you" began for the first time to have an interior. How, he said, a bad man came to your house when you were a baby. He had decided to kill your family. He came specifically for you. Your mother was a witch, little one. So was your father. They had magic. They had been trained in magic, but they were taken by surprise that night, and the bad man was very powerful, and your father died first on the stairs. He was trying to give your mother time. Then the bad man came upstairs. Your mother put herself in front of you, little one. She did it deliberately. She knew what would happen. She made a choice. She chose. The bad man told her to step aside. She did not step aside. She let the spell strike her instead of you. Harry, who was 6.5 years old in his bed in the cupboard, but 5 years old in his body in the place, felt his small face wet. And there was someone else there, little one. He looked up. Who? Me, little one. I was there too. I came across the sea from the place because the lasso called me. I came because a small child was about to be killed, and the lasso would not let me sit still. I tried to stop the bad man at the door. I was not entirely successful. I was killed too, but not before some part of me went up the stairs and stayed with you. The part that stayed with you is what is on your wrist now. The part that is talking to you now. The part that has been your these last years. Harry in the dream looked at her with his mouth open. He was trying to fit too many things into his small mind at once. You died, he said. Yes, little one. For me. For you, so you are not real. You are a ghost. You are a dead person. I am a dead person who is also still here for you. I do not know what that makes me, little one. I am not perhaps exactly a person any longer. I am what is left of a person who chose to put herself in front of a curse for a child she had never met, and the dying did not take all of her because the lasso would not let it take all of her. I am the part that the lasso saved. I am the gift, little one. I am the gift your mother and I both made you that night. I am for you. I am only for you. Harry in the dream threw his arms around her waist and pressed his face into her stomach and cried. He cried for a long time. She did not try to stop him. She knelt down, eventually, and gathered him up, and put her chin on the top of his head, and let him cry into her collarbone. He cried until he had no more crying, and then he hiccuped, and then he was quiet, and then he said into her neck, I want my mum. I know, little one. I want my mum and my dad and you. I want all 3 of you. I want you not to be dead. I want everyone not to be dead. I want everyone to come back. I want a house with all of you in it. I want a kitchen with all of you in it. I know, little one. She did not promise that this would happen. She did not lie to him. She held him and she did not lie, and after a long time he understood in some small part of himself that the not lying was, in its way, a kind of giving, that she could have given him a false comfort and she had instead given him a true sadness, and that he was, in some small way, more grown up at the end of the night than he had been at the start. He woke in the cupboard with his eyelashes wet. He sat up. He pressed the heel of his hand to his right eye, then his left. He stared at the dark for a long time. Then he said aloud very softly, Thank you. The warmth on his wrist answered, VII. By his 7th birthday, Harry Potter knew. He knew that he had had a mother named Lily who had died for him. He knew that he had had a father named James who had died for him also. He knew that he had had a guardian, given to him in his cradle, who had also died for him, and who was the warmth on his wrist. He knew that her name was Diana, and that she was, or had been, a princess of a place called Themysciran. He knew that there were people called witches and wizards, and that he might be one of them. He knew that the world had a thing called the Lasso of Truth, which compelled truth. He knew the 12 stances. He knew enough Greek to ask, in Greek, where the bath was, where the kitchen was, what time it was, whose figs these were. He knew the 4 combinations of truth and belief. He knew the lesson about the stick. He knew also that he was loved. The last item the Dursleys would have been startled to learn was the most consequential. A child who is loved becomes a particular kind of adult, slower to anger, surer in his own bones, less likely to mistake cruelty for power. Harry Potter, by his 7th birthday, had been loved, even in his cupboard, by a woman who was technically dead, in a country which technically did not exist, in a dream which technically did not happen. The technicalities did not interest him. The loving had been real. The lasso around his wrist had taken its first long step in raising him. There were many steps yet, but the foundation, the lasso would have said if it had spoken aloud, the foundation had been laid and it would hold. It would hold against the school he had not yet attended. It would hold against the politics he had not yet learned. It would hold against the war he did not yet know was waiting for him. It would hold in the end against the wraith that had once, on an autumn night in 1981, mistaken a baby for a piece of theater. It would hold because love is, in fact, the lasso had always known this. It was, after all, a goddess's gift, the foundation that holds. The truth was love's older sister. The lasso taught both. Harry, on the brink of 7, was learning both. And he was learning them in a cupboard, which is to say, he was learning them despite everything, which was, in its way, the most Amazon thing about him. His mother would have been proud. His father would have been proud. His guardian was very proud. And on the Themysciran, on a terrace where the sea breathed against the cliffs, an old queen ate her breakfast and asked, without raising her voice, of the air around her, "And how is my grandson today?" The wind, which had become her dispatch, said, "Well, your majesty, he is well, he learns, he grieves a little, he recovers, he grows." Hippolyta nodded. She returned to her bread. "Tell him," she said, "that his grandmother sends her love." VIII. The vision of the hearth. There came a night in the spring of Harry's 7th year when he dreamed of a thing he had not dreamed of before, which was not the place at all but a room beyond the place, a place inside the Themysciran but not on its visible map. He had gone to sleep in the cupboard. He had crossed by the soft, customary slide into the courtyard outside the palace. He had found that night no Diana. The benches were empty. The figs on their table were uneaten. The light was the deep blue of evening, almost night, with the first stars already in their places. He had been, for a moment, frightened. He had thought he had at last dreamed her absence, and that the absence was permanent, and that he had been delivered into the place alone forever. He had stood by the empty bench with his small hands at his sides. Then he had heard from somewhere deeper inside the palace the soft sound of a fire crackling. He had followed the sound. It had led him through corridors he had never walked. The palace that night was larger than it had been in his other dreams. The corridors went farther in. He had passed empty colonnades and rooms in which marble tables held lit lamps and bowls of cool water, but no occupants. He had walked for what felt in dream time like 10 minutes, which would have been in waking time perhaps 30 seconds. He had come at last to a low arched door. The door had stood half open. Through it had come the warm orange light of a fire and the warmer smell of wood smoke and bread. He had pushed the door fully open. He had stepped through. The room beyond had been small. It had had a round hearth in the middle, with a fire burning on it of olive wood and bay laurel. The fire had not had a chimney. The smoke had simply risen up through a small round opening in the ceiling, where Harry could see, when he looked up, the same blue evening sky as outside, slightly closer than seemed reasonable. The room had had no furniture except a low stone bench around the wall. A woman had been sitting on the bench. She had not been Diana. She had been older than Diana, but not in any human way. Harry had felt, looking at her, that her age was the age of something he did not have a category for. She might have been 30, or 3,000, or 30,000, and he could not have said which. She had been small, by Diana's standards, not a tall woman. She had had hair the color of new wheat. She had had a robe the color of bread crust. Her eyes had been, Harry would say if pressed later, the color of the inside of a fireplace at 4 in the afternoon, that deep slow orange red of coals. She had looked at him. She had said simply, "Hello, child." Harry had said hello. He had not in his first second been afraid. He had felt, and he would never quite have words for this, but he would feel the feeling all his life and know it when he felt it, that he was in a room of perfect hospitality, where any visitor was welcome and no visitor would be harmed. He had said, are you the goddess?" She had smiled. She had said, "I am a goddess, yes. There are many. I am the one whose lasso lives on your wrist. I am the one who sent your guardian. I am sometimes called Hestia by your kind. Sit, child, there is bread, there is wine. The wine is small wine, it is for a child, you may have some. Sit." Harry had sat. He had taken the small cup of wine and the small piece of bread she had handed him. He had eaten. The bread had been the best bread he had ever eaten. The wine, small and watered as it was, had warmed him from the breastbone outward. She had watched him eat. she had said after a while. I have been wanting to meet you, child. I have not, before this evening, had permission to. There are rules, you see. The lasso must do its work without my interference. I am only allowed once to come and look at the child whom the lasso has chosen. It is a privilege of the goddess of the hearth, once in each lasso-bearing, to come and have one quiet talk. I have come tonight. Oh, Harry had said, you are doing well, child. You are doing what your guardian hoped you would do. You are growing into a small, kind person. The kindness has been the great achievement. Many children, given what was given to you, would have grown into something harder. You did not. I want to thank you for that. Harry had said with his mouth full of bread. It was Lass. It was Lass who did that, not me. She had laughed, a small, dry, warm laugh. Diana would say it was you. Diana and I will, when we meet again, have this argument all night. We will both be partly right. The kindness is something the two of you have made together. You should both perhaps accept the credit. You will need to learn, child, as you grow, to accept credit when it is offered to you. Many decent people refuse credit when offered. They believe refusing makes them more decent. It does not. It makes them, in some small way, less honest. Accept the credit, you earn the kindness. Lass helped. Both true. He had thought about this. He had nodded. Hestia had said, now, child, I am here to tell you 3 things. They are small. You will not remember them precisely when you wake, but they will be in you. They will work in you the way bread works in you, quietly and well. He had set the cup down. The first thing she had said is that the lasso, when it leaves you, will not leave you. The lasso, you must understand, is a tool. The tool will, one day, be returned to me. Diana will go with it. But the part of Diana that has come to live inside you over these years, that part will not be in the lasso. That part will be in you. You will carry it. It will be yours. You will not lose her, child. You will lose only the warm coil on your wrist. You will keep the woman. He had felt, even in the dream, a small, thin grief at this. He had also felt a small, thin relief. The second thing Hestia had said is that the work you are doing in your country is not the only work you will do in your life. Many people, when they have done a great work young, believe they have done all the work they have to do. They sit down. They become very tedious. They become old quickly because their newness has gone. You must not be such a person, child. After you have killed the bad man, and you will kill the bad man, we are quite sure of this, you must find more work. There will be many things in your world to make better. There will be small things in your house. There will be middle things in your neighborhood. There will be large things in your country and in your time. Keep working. Do not ever sit down with the feeling that you have done enough. The hearth that is not tended goes out. The hearth that is tended every day burns 100 years. He had nodded again. The third thing she had said. She had paused. She had reached out across the small distance between them and had put her warm, extraordinarily warm hand on top of his small one. The third thing is that you are loved, child, not only by your living people, by many who you will not meet until you have died, by many who died before you were born. By me, although I have just met you. By a great quantity of women on an island you have not yet seen with waking eyes. By 2 women whose graves you have not yet visited. By the lasso itself, which is, although it is a tool that has its own way of loving the hand it lives in. Carry the loving, child. Do not, in your difficult days, forget it. Reach for it. It will be there. The hearth is not, has never been, only your own. There are many of us tending it for you. He had begun to cry in the dream, small, quiet tears, and she had held his hand and let him cry, the way Diana would have, the way his mother would have, if his mother had had the years. After a while she had said, now, child, sleep. When you wake you will not exactly remember this. You will remember it in your bones. You will be, for the rest of your life, a person who has met a goddess once briefly in a small kitchen room and who has been told he is loved. You will not be able to put the meaning into words. You will, however, walk a little taller. That is enough. That is, I think, why we are permitted the one visit. Go, child, go and sleep. Diana will return to her bench in the courtyard in the morning. She has been, very respectfully, waiting outside while we talked. She is excited to see you again. She will be in her usual place. She had stood. She had walked him to the door. She had laid her hand on his forehead in the small private blessing of a hostess who has given a guest her best room. He had crossed the threshold. The door had closed behind him. He had walked back through the corridors. He had reached the courtyard. The benches had still been empty, the figs still uneaten, the blue evening sky still above. He had, as Hestia had told him, woken in his cupboard before he could find Diana again. He had sat up in the dark. He had not, in any specifiable way, remembered the meeting. He had remembered, very vaguely, a fire. He had remembered the taste of bread. He had remembered, more clearly than anything, the warmth of a hand on his. He had touched his forehead. There had been on it the faintest residual warmth, almost gone, but there. He had lain back down. He had slept again. He had for the rest of his life been the person Hestia had told him he would be, a person who had once, briefly, in a small kitchen room of his early life, met a goddess. He never put the meeting into words. He walked very slightly taller. That was enough. IX. The stances move. By the end of his 7th year, the 12 stances had taught Harry something he had not expected, which was that his body had become, in the slow, patient way of a body taught well, legible to him. He had not known a body could be legible. He had thought of his body, the way most children thought of their bodies, as a thing one was inside. The body was a vague container. It moved when one told it to move. It was clumsy when it was clumsy. It was sometimes hungry or cold or itchy, but the hungry or cold or itchy were states that simply happened to one, and one had no particular insight into why. The stances had changed this. By his 7th year, he had a vocabulary of his own physical states which he could read in himself with the ease of reading a clock. He knew at any given moment where his weight was. He knew which muscles in his back were tight. He knew if his breath had risen out of his belly into his chest because Vernon had walked into the room, and he could lower it again at will. He knew which of his fingers were colder than the others. He knew, for instance, that his left shoulder was, by a very small constant amount, higher than his right, and he understood that this was a residue of years of carrying a heavy book bag on his left side, and he had begun, by his 8th year, to deliberately rebalance. He could feel also when his body was about to surprise him. This had been the strangest gift. Diana had explained it gently. A child's body is always a little ahead of the child little one. The body has its own quiet intelligence. The body knows when it is about to fall. The body knows when it is about to be hit. The body knows when it is about to cry. Most children do not listen to their bodies, and so the body's predictions seem to them like surprises. You have been taught to listen. The body will tell you a half-second before it tells you. It is a great kindness from a body to a child. You will use it all your life. He used it the next week when Dudley, bored after a Sunday lunch, decided to push Harry off the back garden bench. Dudley's plan had been the standard plan. He had crept up behind Harry from the kitchen door. He had intended a quick shove between the shoulder blades. He had expected, as he had 100 times, that Harry would tumble forward and Dudley would laugh. What had happened was this. Harry had felt, half a second before Dudley arrived, a small change in the air pressure behind him. He had felt, in his ribs, a thin tightening that was his body's prediction of a coming impact. He had, without thought, without strategy, in the smooth, slow way the stances had taught him, leaned, by perhaps 3 inches, forward on the bench. He had also, with his right foot, hooked the bench's leg slightly. Dudley had collided with empty back. Dudley had also collided in the failure of the collision with the back of the bench, which had then, on its hooked leg, tipped backward in the small, precisely calibrated way Harry's foot had set up, and Dudley had gone, not over Harry's shoulder as he had intended, but over the bench's back into the bed of dahlias behind it. Harry had stood up calmly. He had walked around the bench. He had offered Dudley a hand up. Dudley and the dahlias had looked at the hand. Dudley had taken the hand. Harry had pulled him to his feet. Dudley had not said thank you. Dudley had not been the sort of boy to say thank you, but Harry had felt this, paused for half a second with his hand still in Harry's, and had looked at Harry as if he were looking at his cousin for the first time. He had not understood in that second what he was looking at, but he had looked. The looking was, the lasso decided, sufficient progress for an autumn afternoon. Dudley had not pushed Harry off a bench again. He had pushed Harry a few more times in other settings, in his later boyhood, but the pushing had grown thinner and more pro forma each time, and by the time Harry was 9, Dudley had largely stopped trying. He had not then become a kind cousin. He had become, in the small, slow way of his kind, a less unkind one. He had grown into a teenager who, when his friends had teased Harry on the street, had, after a long hesitation, once told them to stop. The friends had stopped. They had not understood why. Dudley had not understood why either. Harry had understood. Harry had nodded once at Dudley, on the doorstep, that afternoon, in the small, quiet way Diana had taught him to nod, and Dudley, on the doorstep, had nodded once back. It was not, Harry knew, the same as having a brother. It was, however, the beginning of having a cousin. By the time he and Dudley were 20, they would, twice a year on average, meet for a pint in a quiet pub in North London, and they would speak, briefly and awkwardly, of their separate lives. And Dudley, by then a personal trainer with 2 small daughters, would say every time on parting, "Take care of yourself, Harry." And Harry would say every time, "And you, Dud." It was not a friendship. It was, however, an acknowledgement. The lasso had been working on it from the back of the cupboard for 17 years by the time the first pint was poured. Diana, when Harry told her about that first pint many years later through the small ground of her presence inside him, said, "Good, The kindness keeps spreading, little one. We could not have done it otherwise. Look how far it has spread. Chapter 4. The boy adults could not lie to. By the time Harry was 10, the staff of his primary school had begun, quietly, to fear him. They would not have said so. They were professional people. They would have said when asked that Harry Potter was an unusually polite child, an unusually still child, a child who looked them in the eye when they spoke to him, and who answered their questions with a kind of slow, grave attention that was, in their experience of 10-year-olds, atypical. None of them disliked him. 2 or 3 of them, frankly, would have died for him. But several of them had, over the course of his last 2 years at the school, the particular experience of telling a small lie in his presence and meeting his green eyes afterward and feeling, distinctly, that the lie had been read off them like a price tag in a shop window. He did not, of course, accuse them. He did not say you are lying. He did not even, particularly, look as though he were judging them. He looked as though he had heard them and then noted the lie and then set the lie carefully aside and was now waiting, patient as a small, unaccusing accountant, for the truth to follow. The truth often did follow. People faced with that small, steady waiting frequently amended. It happened, for instance, to Mr. Doyle. Mr. Doyle taught Year 5 mathematics, and he was a tired man who was not unkind, but who was, in the manner of tired men, sometimes lazy with the truth. He had marked one of Harry's tests with a mark Harry believed to be too low. Harry had come up to his desk at the end of the lesson and said, "Very politely, sir, I think the answer to question 7 is correct. Could you check?" Mr. Doyle had glanced at the test irritably and said, "I checked it the first time, Potter. The answer is wrong." Harry had looked at him, just that. He had not raised his voice. He had not made a face. He had stood there in his too large hand-me-down jumper with the test in his hand and looked at Mr. Doyle with what Mr. Doyle would later, in the staff room, describe as that bloody patient look they all have when you're being an arse. Mr. Doyle had looked at the test again. He had looked at the answer in the answer book. He had looked at Harry's working. He had said in a slightly different voice, "Hold on. Yes, the working is correct. I'd marked it on the assumption that, never mind. The mark stands as your answer. I owe you 2 points. Sorry, Potter." He had handed the test back. Harry had said, "Thank you, sir," and left. In the staff room later, Mr. Doyle had told the story as a complaint. He had not received a complaint in return. Instead, the Year 4 teacher, Mrs. Gupta, had set down her tea and said, "I had the same." He pointed out I'd misspelled necessary on the board. He didn't crow, he just pointed. The Year 3 teacher had said, "He told me very politely that the goldfish in the corner needed its water changed because he'd seen it gasping for 2 days and I hadn't noticed. I hadn't bloody noticed. He was right, he'd noticed." The Year 6 teacher, whose name was Mr. Pratchett and who was the only member of the staff who had had Harry in his classroom and not had a particular experience with him, had said, "You all sound a bit silly. He's just a clever boy." "There are clever boys every year." "Yes," Mrs. Gupta had said, "but this one is—" She had stopped. She had not had the word. She had picked her tea back up. The staff room had been quiet. The word she did not have was the word the lasso had been training Harry to be. The lasso did not use this word about him. The lasso preferred to speak in stories and stances, but if the lasso had used a word, the word would have been witness. Harry was, at 10, becoming a witness. He had been raised by something that compelled truth, and he had been taught by something that loved him to distinguish 4 kinds of speech, and he had been told, with the great patient insistence of a princess of the Amazons in his dreams, that a person who could see lying and did not name it was a person standing on the riverbank with a stick. He was beginning, very slowly, to put the stick out. Not in any large way, not yet. He had not yet been given a stage. He was practicing on Mr. Doyle, who had marked one of his tests wrong, on Mrs. Gupta, who had misspelled necessary, on Mr. Pratchett, who treated him too casually for what Harry was. He was practicing because Diana had said, "If you are going to be a thing, little one, you must practice being it. The lasso is for the larger lies. But you cannot wait for the larger lies to come before you have learned to look at the small ones. Look at the small ones now. They will train you for the others." So Harry looked at the small ones. He looked also at the Dursleys. It is necessary to say at this point that the Dursleys were no longer entirely the same Dursleys. The change had been slow. It had happened, in fact, so slowly that none of them, not Vernon, not Petunia, not Dudley, had marked it. They lived their lives at the speed of small daily decisions, and a person whose life is made of small daily decisions does not notice when, over the course of 3 years, the decisions begin to bend. Petunia had bent first. She had stopped at some point during Harry's 7th year, slapping him. She had not exactly decided to stop. She had merely, when occasions arose, found that her hand did not raise. She would notice the absence of the slap afterward, while doing the dishes, and feel a small confusion. She had also stopped, at some point during his 8th year, locking the cupboard from the outside. She had at some point during his 9th year begun to leave the cupboard door open at night so that the boy could see the hallway light when he was scared. None of these decisions had been articulated. Petunia would have denied them, in fact, if asked. Vernon had bent next. The bending was smaller. Vernon was a thicker man, who did not bend easily, but it was real. He had stopped at some point, calling the boy boy exclusively. He occasionally called him Harry now, especially when other adults were present, although in the privacy of the lounge he reverted. He had stopped at some point, blaming Harry for things Dudley had done, not because he had stopped blaming Harry generally, but because the specific tactic of laying Dudley's transgressions on Harry had simply stopped, the way a habit stops when one notices, mid-execution, that the habit has become slightly embarrassing. Dudley had not bent. Dudley was 11. Dudley was an 11-year-old boy who had been raised to believe that he was the center of his household's gravity. He still made daily efforts to remind everyone of this. He still pushed Harry into walls when no adult was looking. He still cried about things he had no right to cry about. He had not bent, not yet, but he had taken a step back from the most aggressive version of himself, in part because his cousin had grown, over the years, into a thin, still, small person whose silences had a certain quality that even Dudley, who did not parse quality, found uncomfortable. This was, the Lasso would have said if asked, what loving a child looked like when the loving had to be done from a wrist. You did not change the Dursleys outright. You did not turn Vernon into a kind man or Petunia into a warm one. You changed the small things. You made the slap not happen this once. You made the locked door unlock this once. You made the breakfast portion be normal-sized this once. And once became often, and often became always, and the Dursleys, who had thought they were running a household, were in fact being managed, gently, 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 by a goddess's gift on a small boy's wrist. Aye. Harry, by 10, had become so accustomed to the lasso that he had begun to forget it was there. This was as Diana had wished. You must not, she had told him, go through your life with your eyes on your wrist. The wrist is mine. The wrist will look after itself. Your eyes are for the world. Look at the world. Trust the wrist, trust me. Trust you and me together, little one, but look outward. Look out. So he looked out. He looked at Mrs. Figg, who lived 4 houses down with 7 cats, and saw that she watched him with more attention than 7 cats and a small pension would explain. He looked at the postman, who had begun, 2 years ago, to bring envelopes addressed in green ink to the house, and to be turned away at the door by Petunia. He looked at the family who had moved in across the street, and who were not, on close inspection, an ordinary family. The father, although he wore a suit and went out at 8 every morning with a briefcase, sometimes came home in robes, by which Harry meant that on 3 occasions he had come back to the house at lunchtime through the back gate in a long black robe with what looked, to Harry, like a wand sticking out of his sleeve. And Harry had thought, so it is them then, who Aunt Petunia has been watching. Those have been wizards on our street all along. He had said nothing to Petunia. He had said it, in the cupboard at night, to Diana. Diana, he had said, lying on his back in the dark with his hands folded on his small chest. I think there are wizards across the street. He had begun, by 10, to call her Diana even in his thoughts. It felt more respectful. He still called her lass aloud sometimes, but the aloud was infrequent. He kept the conversations inside himself, where the Dursleys could not hear and judge. Yes, she had said, there are. The headmaster of the wizarding school in your country placed them there. They are watching you. Why? Because the headmaster knows you are coming to his school. He does not want to lose track of you in the meantime. Why does he want to keep track of me? Because, little one, you killed a very dangerous man when you were a baby. He thinks you killed him in some other way, but the fact is you killed him, and the wizarding world remembers. The headmaster, his name is Albus Dumbledore, would like to know that you are alive and well. He sent us your invitation when you were a baby, and the invitation was, in his view, partly an invitation to a school and partly a placement of you with relatives where he could keep an eye. Oh, Harry had said. Do you have feelings about this? He had thought about it. I don't know yet. It is a thing to think about. Is the headmaster a good man? There had been a pause. Diana had thought carefully before answering. She had taught him to do this with hard questions, and she did it herself. The headmaster, she had said at last, is a complicated man. He is, in some important ways, a good man. He has done many good things. He has also done some things which were not entirely truthful, and some things which were truthful but were not exactly kind, and some things which were both untruthful and unkind, although in those cases he believed himself to be acting for the greater good. He believes very heavily in the greater good. The phrase is, in fact, his guiding phrase. It is the phrase of a man who has been hurt by a small thing and is determined to set up large protections for everybody else against the small thing. It is also, occasionally, the phrase of a man who has decided that he gets to decide what the greater good is. You will need to make your own judgment about him, little one. He is going to be in your life. He is going to try to direct your life. You will have to decide how much directing you accept and how much you do not. Could I ask him with the lasso? She had laughed. Yes, you could. You could rope the headmaster of the wizarding school with the lasso of Hestia and demand the truth of him. He would even perhaps give you some version of the truth. I would not, little one, advise it, not as your first move. He is older than your parents would have been. He is older than most of your teachers. He is, in a certain sense, the most powerful living wizard in your country. You do not generally open a relationship with such a person by binding him with a magical rope. You open it by listening and watching and seeing what he will and won't say, and then, if he proves to need it, you bind him. Save the lasso for need, little one. It is not a parlor trick. Yes, Diana. Although she had added with a small dry warmth, I admit that I, in your position, would be tempted. He is the sort of man one is tempted to bind. He will earn it eventually, perhaps. We will see. Aye. A small inventory, then, of what Harry Potter knew, or suspected, on the morning of his 10th birthday. He knew his parents had been killed by a man called Voldemort. He knew Voldemort had also tried to kill him and had failed. He knew Voldemort's body had been destroyed, but Voldemort himself was probably not dead, because Diana had explained that some forms of evil could survive their own bodies, and because the lasso, on his wrist, had told him this very directly one night when he had asked. He knew there was a magical school called Hogwarts, and that he would be invited at 11. He knew there was a headmaster called Albus Dumbledore, and that this man would try to manage him. He knew there was a wizarding government called the Ministry of Magic, which had behaved, during the war that had killed his parents, in ways that ranged from cowardly to corrupt, and which would now be trying to claim he was its protege. He knew there were a number of people called Death Eaters, who had served Voldemort, and that most of them, after his fall, had bought themselves out of prison or trial by claiming they had been under a spell called the Imperius. Diana had told him this with a particular dry intonation that had made him understand, without further explanation, that the Imperius claim was, in the cases of most of those people, a lie. He knew that he was going to walk into a building full of liars in less than a year, and that he was going to be given a wand and a uniform and a small list of subjects, and that he was also going to be expected by everyone he met to be a particular kind of person, either a brave returning hero or a damaged orphan or a dark lord in the making, depending on who was looking, and that none of those expectations had anything to do with who he actually was. He knew that he was thin and quiet and 10 years old, and that the only living person in his household who had ever called him by his name without sounding put upon was his Aunt Petunia, and only when she was tired enough not to perform. He knew that he had a goddess's gift on his wrist and a princess in his dreams. He knew that this was an unusual situation for a 10-year-old. He knew also that he was not afraid. IV. The not being afraid was, perhaps, the strangest feature of Harry at 10. By every reasonable measure, he should have been a frightened child. He had been raised in a cupboard. He had been told no one had wanted him. He was about to be sent into a world of strangers, several of whom would want him dead. He should have been a small bundle of anxiety in a school jumper. He was not. He was a small bundle of attention. He had been taught by a woman who had died for him, by a lasso that compelled truth, by an alphabet of stances, by a Greek tutor who lived inside his wrist, that the world was a thing you watched. He had been taught to watch it. He had been taught also that he had a place in it. You are mine, Diana had told him 100 times. You are also your mother's and your father's. You are also your aunt's in her thin way, although she does not know how to show it. You are also in some odd way Hestia's. You belong, little one. You belong to several people and several places. You will never not belong. You may live in a cupboard. You may live in a castle. You belong. A child who knows he belongs is hard to fright. He looked that morning at the calendar on the kitchen wall. It was July 1991. He was about to turn 11. The Hogwarts letter was, by Diana's reckoning, due any day. He had been preparing, by reading whatever he could lay hands on at the small public library, which was not much. He had read the Greek myths, the King James Bible, and a 1971 children's encyclopedia in 5 volumes which he had read through twice. He had read also 3 Agatha Christie novels left in the cupboard by a previous tenant of the house. These had taught him, more than he expected, how to listen to dialogue for inconsistencies. He had read poetry, although Petunia had taken the poetry book back to the library before he had finished it. He had a small private vocabulary of words he could not pronounce because he had only ever read them, including melancholy, denouement, epistemology, and errant, which he liked particularly. He looked at the calendar. He felt the lasso warm on his wrist. "Today, do you think?" he said inwardly. "Soon," Diana said. "Not today, the day after, perhaps. Be patient, little one. He will send a giant. He sends giants for important things. They are gentler than wizards. You will like the giant, by the way. The giant is one of the better people you will meet in your life. Be kind to the giant. He needs it. All right. Also, when the letter comes, your uncle will try to refuse it. Do not let him refuse it. You do not need to fight him for it. You only need to be still. He will fold. He has been folding for years. He will fold this time also. All right. And little one, yes, Diana, when you arrive at the school. When the letter has come and the giant has come, and you have gone with the giant to buy your things, and you have boarded the train and been sorted and so on, when you have done all that, there will be a particular evening in your first year when a particular adult at that school will pretend to be afraid and stammer and be a figure of jokes. He is not what he seems. He has the wraith of Voldemort inside him. He has come there for one purpose, which is to harm you. You will know him because the lasso will burn against your wrist when he is in the room. The way it burned for me, the night I came across the veil. Be patient. Watch. Wait. And then when the moment is right, little one, when you have your audience around you and your eyes are clear and your stances are firm, bind him. Bind him in front of every soul in that hall. Make him say what he is. End the lie there. Harry stood at the kitchen window in his Aunt Petunia's house. He looked out at the garden. He looked at the hedge, square as the hedge across the road. He looked at the sky, which was the color of a baby's eye. He took into himself this instruction. Yes, he said. Yes, I will. I have been practicing. I have been practicing on small lies for years. I will be ready. I know, little one, Diana said. Of course you will be. You have been my student. A long, sweet silence. Then she said quietly, Happy birthday week, little one. The world is about to change for you. Hold on to my wrist. Hold on to your own wrist. I am here. I will always be here. He smiled. He was alone in the Dursleys' kitchen with his hand resting on the windowsill. He smiled at the hedge. He went to find his aunt. He found Petunia in the laundry room. She was folding sheets. He came up next to her and, without asking, took the other end of the sheet she was folding and helped her. She glanced at him. This was the thing she had never been able to do with him, glance at him. She had looked at him many times, directly, accusingly, fed up. She had never glanced. A glance was an admission of intimacy. A glance was for someone you knew well enough to take for granted. She glanced at her son 50 times a day. She glanced at her husband 20. She had not glanced at her sister's son in 10 years. Today she did. She did not, of course, comment on it. She handed him the corners. He matched them to his. They folded the sheet between them with the easy synchronicity of two people who have done this many times together. Although they had not done it many times together, Harry had done his own laundry from the age of 8, and Petunia had done hers, and they had never met in the middle. They folded. When the sheet was folded into a neat rectangle, Petunia laid it on the pile, and Harry picked up the next one, and they began again. After the third sheet, she said, without looking at him, Letter's going to come for you, isn't it, from that place? Harry's heart did a small thing. He kept his face calm. Yes, Aunt Petunia, you knew about it. You knew it was coming. He thought very fast about whether to lie. He decided not to. I knew about it, Aunt Petunia, yes. How long have you known? A while. How long is a while, Harry? He hesitated. Since I was very little. She kept folding. After a long moment she said, You'll go, I suppose. I'd like to go, Aunt Petunia, yes. Your uncle won't like it. Number, he'll roar. He'll roar properly this time. He'll roar fit to bring the roof down. He'll burn the letter in the kitchen sink. He'll do everything he can think of to keep you here, you know that. Yes, Aunt Petunia. She set down the sheet. She looked at him directly, finally. Her face was tired. The skin under her eyes was thin and slightly purple. She looked in that moment more like Lily, Harry suddenly thought, than he had ever thought she could. She said, Don't let him. Harry blinked. She said it again, Don't let him. I have been letting him for 10 years. I have been letting your uncle decide things he had no business deciding. I have let him keep you small. I have let him keep you in a cupboard. I have let him pretend our family was the family he wanted instead of the family it is. I have let him. And it has been wrong of me, Harry. I would not say this to you if I were not, this minute, fairly sure I will lose my nerve in an hour and never say it again. I am saying it now. I have been wrong about you. Your mother loved you. Your father loved you. I did not want 10 years ago to take you in. I am, I think, glad now that I had no choice. You are not what I thought you would be. You are, I do not know what you are. You are a thin, still boy who has been making my house better for years, and I have not been thanking you for it. I am sorry. She picked the sheet back up. She folded it. She handed him the corners. He took them. They did not say any more that morning. They folded 6 more sheets. When the sheets were done, Petunia went into the kitchen and made tea and brought him a cup. She had never brought him a cup of tea in her life, and set it on the counter beside him and said, "Milk's there," and went on with her morning. He drank the tea. The lasso on his wrist did a small thing. It was not exactly a glow. It was a kind of soft folding in on itself, the way a flower folds in at evening. "Did you do that?" Harry asked Diana inwardly. "Did you make her say it?" "No, little one," Diana said. "She said it herself. I would not have made her. The lasso would not make a person say a thing about themselves they were not ready to say. She has been ready for some time. She finally said it." "Oh, yes." He sat in the kitchen and finished his tea. Petunia, at the sink, did not look at him again, but the not looking was a different not looking from the not looking of the previous decade. It was the not looking of a woman who had just said a difficult thing and was now letting it settle. It was, Harry suddenly understood, the not looking of intimacy. He set the mug in the sink. He said, "Thank you, Aunt Petunia." She nodded. He went up to his cupboard, although for some months now the door had remained open at night and the cupboard had become more of an idea than a prison, and he sat on his mattress and he held his wrist with his other hand and he said very quietly, "Lass, the letter comes when, day after tomorrow," Diana said. "Be ready, be still, be courteous, and smile, little one. You are about to begin." He smiled. He was not afraid. He had not been afraid for years. The Hogwarts letter arrived, as Diana had said it would, 2 days after Petunia's quiet confession in the laundry room. Vernon by then had begun to suspect that something had shifted in his wife. He could not have articulated what. He had been married long enough to know when Petunia was preparing to do a thing he would not like, there was a particular tightness around her mouth, a particular crispness in her movements at the stove, a particular tone in her good morning, and that tightness had been in her bearing for several days. He had braced himself, vaguely, for some announcement he would not enjoy. He had not predicted the form. The form was an envelope. It came on the kitchen table at breakfast, delivered through the kitchen window by a slow, tawny owl that Vernon had been about to swat at with a folded newspaper before Petunia, with surprising firmness, had said, "Let it through, Vernon." The owl had stepped onto the windowsill. It had deposited the envelope on the toast plate. It had inclined its head. Harry would remember this. The owl had inclined its head and had departed. The envelope had been addressed in green ink, in a careful copperplate. Mr. H. Potter, the smallest bedroom, 4 Privet Drive, Little Winging, Surrey. Harry had picked it up. He had read the address. He had said mildly to no one in particular, "It says smallest bedroom. It must mean the one upstairs." Petunia had pinned Vernon to his chair with a single look. Vernon had taken 3 breaths. Then Vernon had said, in the voice of a man trying his best not to lose a battle he had not realized was already over, "Well, open it then, Harry." Harry had opened it. He had read it aloud in his small, even voice. "Dear Mr. Potter, we are pleased to inform you that you have a place at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Please find enclosed a list of all necessary books and equipment. Term begins on the 1st of September. The letter was signed Minerva McGonagall, Deputy Headmistress. A long silence had fallen at the kitchen table. Then Dudley, who had been a silent observer of the morning's strangenesses for some minutes, had said, with sudden, uncomplicated curiosity, "Will you have a wand?" Harry had looked up. He had said, "Yes, Dudley, I'll be having a wand." "Will it do tricks?" "Yes, like card tricks, more like changing things. I'll be learning how this year. Could you change me into a frog?" "I don't think they'll teach us that, Dud. Or if they do, I won't anyway, because you wouldn't like being a frog." Dudley had thought about this. "Probably wouldn't," Dudley had said. "Frogs are wet." All right. He had returned to his breakfast. Vernon had stared at his son. Vernon had not known what to do with a son who simply asked a curious question and accepted a reasonable answer. Vernon's son, in his lived experience, was a son who threw cereal across the kitchen when he did not like a piece of news. Vernon had set down his paper. He had said in a voice that was not, for once, a roar but was a kind of slow, tired exhalation, "Right, well, I will need a moment, Petunia. I will need to get my mind around it. I think I will take a walk." "Yes, Vernon," Petunia had said. He had got up. He had put on his coat. He had walked out of the kitchen and out the front door and around the close with his hands in his pockets twice. He had come back. He had hung up the coat. He had come into the kitchen. He had said in a voice that he had clearly rehearsed during the walk, "Right, Harry. The boy goes to the school. The boy needs his things bought. I will pay for them from the household budget, like I would Dudley's. The boy he is part of the household. He will be paid for like the household." He had sat down. He had picked up his paper. He had not, in the next 40 years of his life, articulated the moment more clearly than this. He had not embraced Harry. He had not apologized. He had not become a warm uncle. He had, however, that morning made a decision he had not previously been able to make, that Harry was his nephew, and that nephews, Vernon's grandfather had drilled this into him at age 6, were a thing one paid for. Vernon had, on the walk, climbed back into the framework of his grandfather's instructions, and had found in the framework a small foothold for himself. The foothold had been enough. Vernon had been, from that morning forward, civil to Harry. He had not been more than civil. Civil had been the most he had ever been to anyone, including his own son, and it was, by Vernon's standards, a vast distance to have come from the man who had, 10 years ago, locked the cupboard from the outside. The lasso on Harry's wrist had noted the new equilibrium. Slow, it would say later, to Hippolyta on her terrace through the wind, but real. The uncle has bent. He will not bend further. He has bent as far as he can. The aunt has gone farther, she will go farther still. She will, by the time the boy is 20, be, quietly, a kind aunt. The cousin has bent half an inch. He has many years yet to bend. The uncle is done bending. We will take what he has given. The kitchen is now navigable. The kitchen, for 10 years, was not navigable. We will take the navigability and call it a victory and not press for more. Hippolyta on her terrace had said, quite right, take it, press for nothing more in that house. Save your pressing for larger houses. The wind had smiled, the strange smile that a wind smiles, which is the way a stand of leaves move, and had carried the queen's instruction back to the lasso, which had been waiting for it. The lasso had in turn stopped pressing. The morning had ended. Harry had folded the letter. He had taken it upstairs and put it under his pillow in his new bedroom, the room that had been Dudley's second room, and had begun, in his quiet, practical way, to think about what he would need to pack. He would not need much. He had not had much. What he would carry to Hogwarts would be the letter, 2 changes of his old clothes. Petunia had said she would, in the next 2 days, buy him a new set of school shoes and a new shirt. The book Mrs. Figg had given him, his small private notebook in which he had been writing his dream lessons in Greek, the wand which he had not yet bought, and the warmth on his wrist which was, in fact, his entire upbringing. He had not had a teddy. He had not had photographs. He had been about to have, Hagrid's photograph album, which Hagrid would give him at the end of the school year, a thick brown paper album full of pictures of his parents that Hagrid had collected from friends and former Order members for years against the day Harry would be old enough to want them. Harry would receive the album at the end of his first year. He would look at the pictures every night for a month. He would say in the inside of himself, looking at his mother's face, the same eyes in the photographs that he had inherited and used every day, hello. Hello, Mum, I am all right. I am all right, you know. You can rest. I am all right. The photographs, of course, had been still on July the 31st, 1991. They had not yet been collected by Hagrid. They had not yet been bound into an album. Harry, sitting on the bed of his new bedroom that morning, had not yet seen his mother's face except in dreams and in Diana's description, and in his own face when he stood in front of the small mirror over the chest of drawers and tilted his head. He had been all right with this also. He had been all right with most things. He had been raised by a woman who had died for him and by a goddess he had, without quite knowing it, already met once for a piece of bread and a small cup of wine, to be all right with most things. He had been by July of 1991, a boy who had in some quiet way made a deep peace with what he had and what he did not have. The peace would over the next years be tested. The peace would hold. The lasso, watching the boy fold the letter and put it under his pillow, did the small inner gladness of a tool that has spent 10 years preparing a hand. The hand is ready, it said, in the way it spoke to itself. The work begins. We have done what we could in the small house. Now we will see what we can do in the great one. VII. The last day on Privet Drive he went, on his last day on Privet Drive, on a small private walk around the close. He walked it deliberately. He walked it the way one walks a place one is leaving for a long time. He went past number 6, where the wood pigeon lived on the chimney. The pigeon had not yet, that morning, made his 3 soft notes, but Harry stopped on the pavement and waited, and after a minute the pigeon obliged. Harry inclined his head. The pigeon inclined his head. Harry walked on. He went past Mrs. Figg's house. The curtains in the front were drawn. Mrs. Figg had not yet, that morning, raised them, but the small light in the kitchen at the back was on, and Harry could see, through the side window, the shape of Mrs. Figg pottering about with the kettle. He did not knock. He had said his goodbye the previous evening, when he had brought back a small jar of jam she had lent his aunt 3 weeks ago. The goodbye had been a small one. Mrs. Figg had said, "Take care of yourself, dear," and Harry had said, "And you, Mrs. Figg," and Mrs. Figg had, for half a second as he had turned to go, set her hand briefly on the crown of his head, in a way Harry had not been touched on the head by an adult before, and had said, "You'll be marvelous, dear, I know it." Harry had not, in the moment, been able to answer. He had instead ducked his head. and the warmth on his wrist had glowed approvingly, and he had said thank you, Mrs. Fig, and had walked back to number 4 with the jam jar empty in his hand and a small new gladness in his chest. He walked this morning past the house across the close where the wizard family had lived for 10 years, and who would, this evening, be quietly withdrawing now that Harry was about to be at Hogwarts and their watching was no longer required. The father in his black robe again that morning, since the day was overcast and he had clearly decided the costuming was no longer worth maintaining, was loading boxes into a long old car. He looked up. He saw Harry. He gave Harry across the close a small grave nod. Harry returned the nod. The father turned back to his boxes. The mother at the window raised her hand. Harry raised his. He walked on. He went past the park at the corner. The park was empty at this hour. He walked through it. He sat for a moment on the swing he had never been allowed to sit on as a small child. Dudley had always claimed it. The swing was Dudley's by what amounted to occupational right, and he swung gently for a minute with his feet on the ground just to feel what it was like. The swing's chains creaked. The morning around him was the muted color of an English morning at the end of August, just before autumn officially began. He thought in his small, even way about what he was leaving. He was leaving a cupboard. He was leaving, he understood this, a particular version of himself who lived in the cupboard. He was not leaving Diana. Diana would go with him. Diana would go everywhere with him. The lasso would be at Hogwarts. The dreams of the place would continue, perhaps slightly less frequently because he would be busy, but they would continue. He was not leaving. He understood this with a small, slow, strange relief, the only thing he had been afraid of losing. He was leaving Petunia. He felt, sitting on the swing, that this was the second item of weight on the morning. Petunia, who had 3 weeks ago, said the difficult thing in the laundry room. Petunia, who had cooked him a proper breakfast yesterday morning, not the meager half portion of his childhood, but a proper plate with 2 eggs and 3 sausages, and a slice of toast cut from the same loaf as Vernon's. Petunia, who had folded his clothes into his trunk last night with her own hands, the way a mother folds clothes into a trunk, the way Petunia had presumably watched her own mother fold clothes for Lily decades ago. Petunia, who had not, Harry knew, said goodbye yet, but who would, when he came out to the car, almost certainly say a thing she had been rehearsing in her head for several days. He thought about Petunia. He thought, she has been the difficult one. She has been the difficult one all along. She has had to be the one to hold the house against herself. Vernon has only had to be Vernon. Petunia has had to be Petunia becoming not Petunia. It has cost her. I will not ever quite be able to thank her for what it has cost her. I will have to live instead the kind of life that makes her costs worth it. That is the only thanks she will accept. The lasso has taught me this. He got off the swing. He walked back to number 4. In the kitchen, Petunia was at the stove. The bacon was almost done. Vernon was in the lounge with the paper. Dudley was, improbably, sitting at the kitchen table eating an apple and reading a comic. Hagrid was due at 10 with the car. Petunia looked up as Harry came in. She said, "Your trunk is by the door." "Thank you, Aunt Petunia." "Your owl is in the cage in the hall." "Thank you." She turned back to the bacon. After a moment she said, without looking at him, "Harry." "Yes, Aunt Petunia." You'll write, will you?" "Yes, Aunt Petunia. Not every week. I don't expect every week, but once a month, just a line or two, so I know how the school is." So I know if there's anything." "Yes, Aunt Petunia, I'll write. And at Christmas, you'll come back, won't you? Not all the boys go home for Christmas. Some stay. But you." "Yes, Aunt Petunia. I'll come home for Christmas." She turned the bacon. She did not look at him. She said very quietly, I will have your room ready, the proper one, the smallest bedroom. I will have it ready, with sheets and so on, the way it should be." "Yes, Aunt Petunia." A long pause. The bacon hissed. She said, "And Harry, Lily, your mother, she would be very proud of you. I am also. I will say it once. I will not say it again, I think. I am proud of you, Harry." She lifted the bacon off the heat. She did not turn around. Harry stood in the kitchen behind her, with his small thin hands at his sides, with the warmth on his wrist glowing in the slow, approving way it glowed when something difficult had been done well. He did not say, "Thank you, Aunt Petunia." "Thank you, Aunt Petunia" would have been too small for what she had said. He said instead, "I love you, Aunt Petunia." He had not in his entire life said this to her. He had not in his entire life said it to anyone, except in dreams, to Diana, who did not count for this particular sentence, since this particular sentence was the kind of sentence one offered to one's living family. He said it now for the first time to the back of his aunt who was at the stove lifting bacon. She did not turn around. She did not say anything. She did, Harry saw from where he stood, raise the back of her right hand very briefly to her face, in a small, quick gesture that one might have read as adjusting her hair and would, if one had been Petunia's sister Lily, have read correctly as wiping the corner of her eye. She set the bacon on the plate. She said in her ordinary voice, "Wash your hands and sit down then, the bacon's done." He washed his hands, he sat down. They ate, the four of them, in the small, quiet kitchen of number 4 Privet Drive. On the last morning Harry Potter would live there as a child. Hagrid arrived at 10 in a ministry car. Harry's trunk was loaded into the boot. Hedwig's cage was put on the back seat. Harry hugged his aunt. Petunia, who had not been hugged by him before, stiffened for half a second and then slowly returned the hug. He shook hands with his uncle. He bumped his shoulder against his cousin's in the awkward, boyish way Dudley would accept as a goodbye. He got into the car. The car drove away. Through the back window, Harry saw the three of them on the front step, Petunia in her apron, Vernon in his shirt sleeves, Dudley with a piece of toast in his hand. Petunia raised her hand. So did Vernon after a half-second of hesitation. So did Dudley, who waved with the toast and looked for that moment exactly like the small, unloved boy he was underneath the bulk, the one who had not known how to want a thing that was his own. Harry waved back. The car turned the corner. The house went out of sight. He sat back. He looked at Hagrid in the driver's seat. He looked at Hedwig, asleep on the seat beside him. He looked at the warmth on his wrist, which was, very faintly, glowing. He said inwardly to Diana, "All right, lass, we have left." She said, "Yes, little one, we have left. Be still, be ready. The work begins." He was still. He was ready. The work began. Chapter 5, The Lasso. In the Great Hall, the giant arrived as Diana had said the giant would arrive. He came on the third day in the late afternoon, after a series of envelopes had been first burned, and then refused, and then, in the end, ignored by a Vernon Dursley who had run out of strategies, and was, by then, sitting in his armchair in the lounge nursing a tumbler of whiskey at 4 in the afternoon, and muttering to the television about decent people, proper schools, and the bloody normal world. There had been a thunderstorm. There had been also a knock at the door, although knock was not the right word for what had happened to the door. The door had been opened from the outside by an open palm of enormous size, in such a way that the door had bowed inward and then stayed bowed. The frame had cracked. The hinges had wept small flakes of paint to the floor. Through the gap had bent, with great care, a man of approximately the dimensions of a small van, with a beard like a haystack and eyes the color of warm beetles, and he had said, in a soft voice for a man so large, "Sorry Abu the door." Petunia had been at the kitchen counter. She had not gone to the door. She had set her hand against the counter very firmly, and she had looked across the kitchen at Harry, who had stood up from where he had been peeling potatoes, and she had said, in a voice that was admirably steady, considering, "Best you go and meet your visitor, Harry. I think it's for you." Harry had gone to the door. He had looked up at the giant. He had felt the warmth on his wrist do a small pleased thing, the way a dog does a small pleased thing when a familiar friend comes up the path. He had said, "Hello, are you Hagrid?" The giant had blinked. Yeah, I am, Rubeus Hagrid, keeper o' keys and grounds at Hogwarts." How did you know me name then, Harry?" "A friend told me about you." "A friend?" "Yes." Hagrid had looked at the small, thin, pale boy in his aunt's hand-me-down jumper, with green eyes and untidy black hair and a lightning scar on his forehead. Hagrid had not said anything for a moment. Then his enormous face had crumpled. Harry would learn that Hagrid's face crumpled often. It was the most expressive face Harry had ever seen, and Hagrid had stepped into the kitchen sideways to clear the door and had laid one enormous warm hand on Harry's shoulder, and he had said, "Yeah, you look like your father, Harry. Spittin' image, apart from the eyes. Ye have got your mum's eyes." "So I've been told," Harry had said. The lasso on his wrist had warmed. Hagrid had then turned to Vernon, who had come into the kitchen, glass in hand, with the particular complexion of a man who has been working hard on his own ruin and has now been interrupted by a wizard. There had been a brief conversation, mostly one-sided. Hagrid had explained with great patience that Harry was a wizard. Vernon had blustered. Hagrid had taken from his coat a kind of cake from his pocket and given it to Dudley, who had been hiding in the doorway. The cake had been the size of Dudley's head. Dudley, taken aback by both the size of the cake and the absence of his usual command of the room, had simply taken the cake and gone to eat it on the stairs, like a small bear retreating with a salmon. Petunia had spoken then, for the first time since the giant had come in. Her voice had been thin and clear. "He's going to the school, Vernon. Pet, he's going to the school. We are not going to discuss it. You are going to put the glass down, and you are going to be civil to this gentleman, and our nephew is going to go up to the cupboard. I mean to his bedroom, Harry. You have a bedroom now. We will sort that out tomorrow, and he is going to pack such things as he wishes to pack. And tomorrow morning we will go to wherever this gentleman needs to take him for his school things, and we will come home, and the day after this gentleman will collect him for the train, and we will all of us, Vernon, look at me, we will all of us conduct ourselves with civility. Do you understand me, Vernon? Vernon had looked at his wife. Vernon had not seen, in 15 years of marriage, the woman who was now looking at him. Vernon had married a different woman, a sister who had stewed about her sister, and was determined to live a small, spotless life in a small, spotless house. The woman in his kitchen was something else. The woman in his kitchen was someone who had over the past months been losing her nerve to be the other woman, and who now appeared to have abandoned her altogether. Vernon, who was many things, was not a stupid man at the fundamental level. He could see a battle he was about to lose. He set his glass down. "Right," he said. "Right, civility. I will be civil, Petunia." "Thank you, Vernon," she had turned to the giant. She had said, quite as if he were a tradesman who had come to fix the boiler, "Will you take a cup of tea, Mr. Hagrid? And there's biscuits in the tin." Hagrid, who had been bracing himself for a more difficult encounter than this, had blinked twice and had taken a chair at the kitchen table. It had creaked alarmingly under him, but had not broken, and had said in a touched voice, Thaw's very kind, ma'am. Yes, tea, and a biscuit." Petunia had put on the kettle. Diana on Harry's wrist had laughed, a small private laugh that only Harry heard. There, she had said. "There, was that not satisfying, little one? Yes, Diana, do not waste it. It is not always like this. Your aunt has been growing, your uncle has been losing, the giant is here, the journey begins, pack lightly, you will not need much. Most of what you need you already have." He had gone upstairs, where Petunia had said his bedroom was, although his bedroom was technically Dudley's second bedroom, into which Dudley's broken toys had been thrown over the past decade. He had stood in the doorway. He had looked at the broken toys. He had decided that the bedroom was, indeed, his, and that the toys could be sorted later. He had not slept in it that night, out of habit, and out of a small fondness. He had slept in the cupboard one last time, but he had stood in the doorway, and he had felt, for the first time in his 10 short years, that he had a room. The next morning, Hagrid took him to Diagon Alley. The journey there was, Harry decided, eating an ice cream that Hagrid had bought him, among the best experiences he had ever had. The leaky cauldron with its kind, battered landlord and its smoky old beams. The brick wall in the back, which had performed, under Hagrid's enormous pink umbrella, an act of architectural reorganization that Harry had watched with the polite interest of a child whose dreams had been more impressive. The alley itself, all crooked spires and crooked signs and small bright-windowed shops, with witches and wizards going about in robes the colors of stained glass. The other thing about the alley was that the moment Harry stepped into it, the wizard stared. He had been ready for this. Diana had warned him. "They will stare," she had said. "Some will whisper. Some will reach out to shake your hand, be polite. Some will be reaching out of sincere gratitude, some out of a desire to be seen reaching out, some out of a wish to add your handshake to a private collection. You may shake their hands, be gentle. Do not be a small celebrity. Do not perform. You are not a returning hero. You are an 11-year-old boy who has come to buy his school books. Behave like one." They will respect it, so he behaved like one. He shook hands with 3 witches and 2 wizards who came up to him with a kind of odd warmth. He said hello, thank you, very kind of you to each, in a small, even voice that was neither thrilled nor cold. He moved on. He did not linger. Hagrid, who had been bracing for a small mob and a small distressed boy, found instead that he had a small dignified boy who could deflect a mob without rudeness, and Hagrid, who had spent most of Harry's life worrying about him from a great distance, felt a small swell of vicarious pride that surprised him. They went to Gringotts. The goblins, when Harry was led down to the vault, did him the courtesy of regarding him exactly as they regarded everyone else, which was to say with the cool patience of beings who were not interested in human celebrity and had not been since the age of Charlemagne. Harry liked the goblins immediately. He noted this to Diana inwardly. "Yes," she said, "the goblins are a serious people. They will not all be friends to you, little one. They have their own quarrels with wizards, but they are honest in their quarrels. You will, when you are older, perhaps find a friend or 2 among them. For now, only this, respect their floor, wipe your feet, do not whistle on it. Do not ask a goblin how his day is going, unless you are prepared to hear the answer. They do not perform politeness. Either be useful to them or be brief with them. They will respect either." He thanked the goblins for their service when they returned him to the surface. The teller blinked, then nodded once gravely, and Harry went on his way. Aye. He bought his books at Flourish and Blots. He bought his cauldron at the apothecary, although the apothecary had also a back room full of small jars whose smell was so strange and so specific that Harry stood in front of them for a long minute trying to identify a single one of them. and could not, and felt suddenly very young in a way he had not felt for years, which was a useful feeling and not an unpleasant one. He bought his robes at Madame Malkin's. The other boy in the shop being fitted was a pale, pointed boy in expensive cloth who looked at Harry's hand-me-down jumper and made a small remark about the company. Harry, who had been raised by an Amazon to recognize a small bid for dominance, smiled at the boy and said, "Yes, the company is mostly young, isn't it?" and went on being fitted. Madame Malkin, who had heard the boy's remark and had been about to say something herself, looked at Harry over her pins with a kind of surprised approval and said nothing. The pale, pointed boy was Draco Malfoy. Harry did not yet know this. He would meet him again at school. He would not in any of their meetings have a difficult time with the boy, because the boy, for all his sharp little tongues and inherited posture, was at the bottom of it, a frightened child being raised by a frightened man, and Harry had been raised by a princess of the Amazons to see the frightened thing inside the cruel thing. The Malfoy boy did not become a friend. He did not become an enemy either. He became, over time, a particular kind of acquaintance. Diana said of him later, "He is the boy your aunt could have been if she had had your mother's money and none of her sense," and Harry understood the comparison without having to ask for it. The last shop was Ollivander's. Ollivander's was the strangest shop Harry visited. It was narrow and tall and full of long, thin boxes. The man behind the counter had silver eyes that moved like the eyes of someone perpetually listening to a conversation no one else was having. He looked at Harry for a long, unbroken moment. He said in a soft voice, "Mr. Potter, I have been wondering when I would see you." "Hello, sir. Your mother's wand was willow, 10¼ inches, swishy, nice wand for charm work." "Yes, sir." "Your father's was mahogany, 11 inches, pliable, a little more power, excellent for transfiguration." "Yes, sir." Ollivander rose, took a long box from a high shelf, opened it. He handed Harry a wand of pale wood. "Try this. Beechwood and dragon heartstring, 9 inches, nice and supple, just take it and give it a wave." Harry took it. It felt neutral. Diana inwardly said, "Number wrong wood. Put it down, little one." He put it down. Ollivander, watching him, smiled a small, dry smile, as if Harry had passed a small test he had not known he was sitting. Several wands followed. None was right. Each in Harry's hand did either nothing at all or some small, inappropriate thing. A wand of yew sent the box behind it cartwheeling off the shelf. A wand of cherry made the lamp on the counter dim. Ollivander grew more interested as each failed. "Curious," he said, mostly to himself. "Curious. You are a curious one, Mr. Potter." He went to the very back of the shop and brought out a particular box. He opened it. Inside lay a wand of dark wood, glossy, slightly bent. "Holly," he said, 11 inches. Phoenix feather core from a particular phoenix. The phoenix had given 2 feathers, one to this wand and one to its brother. The brother of this wand had, but Ollivander did not say what the brother had done, because Harry had taken the wand out of the box, and the wand had made a small bright sound that was not exactly a sound, and a warm wind had moved through the shop, and on Harry's wrist the lasso had glowed in mild approval, and Ollivander had said very softly, "That will be the one, Mr. Potter. Yes, that will be the one." There was a short interval during which Ollivander explained, gravely, the matter of the brother wand. The brother wand, he said, had killed Harry's parents. The brother wand had given Harry his scar. The brother wand had belonged to the man whose name Ollivander would not say, but whom Harry, having been instructed by a princess of the Amazons to use the correct names of things, said calmly, "Voldemort, sir." Ollivander winced. "Yes," he said. "Yes, him, and it is curious, Mr. Potter, that this wand of yours, the brother of his, well, we must expect great things from you, Mr. Potter. Great things. He did great things. Terrible, yes, but great." Harry, who had been listening to Diana inside his head while Ollivander spoke, said, very gently, "I think, sir, that I would rather do good things than great ones. I do not consider greatness by itself an achievement. I would not want to be a man like him, even with great things. I will use the wand for what I can. Thank you for it." Ollivander stared at him. He stared at him for what felt, to Harry, like a very long time. Then Ollivander did something Harry would always remember, which was that the old wandmaker bent his head, bent it in the slow, particular way of a man saluting another man's deeper insight, and said quietly, "Very well, Mr. Potter, very well." He took Harry's 7 galleons. Harry left. In the street outside, in the sunlight, with Hagrid waiting by the ice cream cart, Diana said, "Beautifully done, little one. That man is one of the 7 wisest in your country, and you have just told him he is wrong about you. He will think about what you said for 10 years. Now, an ice cream, you have earned it. Aye. The train was less remarkable than he had been expecting. It was an ordinary train, except that it was scarlet. It was full of children, except that the children wore robes and several of them had owls. Harry boarded it with his trunk in the cage he had been given by Hagrid as a birthday present. Hagrid had also given him an owl in the cage, a snowy owl whom Harry had named Hedwig after a name in one of his books, and he found a compartment near the back, and he sat down by the window, and a red-haired boy his own age came in hesitantly and asked if the other seat was taken. "It isn't," Harry said. "Please, sit." The red-haired boy sat. He was tall and freckled, and his robes were second-hand, and Harry felt, looking at him, an immediate small kinship. The boy's name was Ronald Weasley, although he asked to be called Ron. Harry asked sincerely what Ron's favorite team was, and Ron, surprised to be asked a question first, said the Chudley Cannons, and Harry, who knew nothing of Quidditch beyond Diana's brief overview, asked him to explain Quidditch. Ron explained for 90 minutes. A girl came to the door, a girl with brown bushy hair and a kindly officious manner, an appealing label of competence written across every word of her. She introduced herself as Hermione Granger. She had been raised in the Muggle world, but had read all the school books twice. She asked if either of them had seen a toad belonging to a boy named Neville. Harry said he had not, but said it kindly. Hermione, surprised, most boys her age were not particularly kind, in her experience, sat down next to Ron, and Harry, watching her, made a small mental note that this was a person whose loyalty was earned by being treated as a person, and who would, if so treated, be one of the most useful and decent allies a person could have. He made another note, that she had a sharpness around her eyes that suggested loneliness, and that the loneliness was the kind of loneliness that came from being clever in a country that did not reward cleverness in girls, and that Harry would do well to be the friend she had not yet had. These were the kinds of notes a child does not generally make at 11. Harry made them. The pale-pointed boy from Madame Malkin's came down the corridor with two large, slow boys behind him. He stopped at Harry's compartment. He said in a small, loud voice, "You'll soon find out some wizarding families are better than others, Potter. You don't want to go making friends with the wrong sort. I can help you there." He extended his hand. Harry looked at it. He looked at it for a long second. He did not, the lasso on his wrist noted, look at it with hostility or with mockery. He looked at it with a kind of slow attention, as if he were reading a small printed page. Then he said, "My name is Harry Potter. I will make my own friends. I think I am capable of telling the wrong sort from the right sort on my own. But I will, Mr. Malfoy, was it? I will return your hand to you with no harm done. Good afternoon." He did not shake the hand. He did not slap it away. He simply nodded gravely and turned his face back to the window. Draco Malfoy stood there with his hand out for 2 full seconds. He could not, in the moment, find a riposte. Then he reddened slightly and lowered his hand, and said something that he intended to be cutting, and that came out merely sullen, and stalked away with his 2 large boys behind him. Ron, opposite Harry, stared. That was bloody perfect, that was," Ron said, half laughing. "I'd have just thumped him, or well, you saw him, I'd have wanted to thump him and then not. You did better," Harry shrugged. "He'll be all right. He's worth a small kindness, even if he doesn't know it yet." Hermione, who had been about to chime in with a quiet opinion of her own, looked at him. She looked at him in a different way after that. So did Ron. They were friends by the end of the train ride. There had been no formal agreement. There never was. Friendships among 11-year-olds began that way. A long ride, a difficult moment handled correctly, a mutual decision that this carriage was a tolerable carriage to spend more journeys in. IV. Hogwarts itself was, Harry would write, in the journal Diana had asked him to keep, the most beautiful building I have ever seen, and the most full of frightened adults pretending to be unfrightened, and the most full of unfrightened children pretending to be frightened, and I love it already. The sorting was a thing. He had been ready for it. Diana had described the hat to him in advance. "It is an enchanted hat, little one. It will look into your mind. You may permit it, or you may not. If you do not, it will sort you on the surface impressions. If you do, it will weigh your potentials and place you with care. I would recommend, for what it is worth, that you let it look. It is a kind old hat. It will not say things to anyone else. It is not a leaky vessel. Let it sort you well." The hat sat on his head and was silent for almost half a minute. Half a minute is not long in adult time. It is a very long time on a stool with the entire school watching. The hat's silence stretched. Harry, in his small, even way, looked down at his knees. He waited. Inside his head, the hat said eventually in a deeply astonished voice, "Well, Harry agreed politely. "You are not, Mr. Potter, what I had expected. No, sir. There is a great deal in here, a great deal. There is something on your wrist, a presence. Is it talking to you now?" "She is listening, sir, yes. She has done a great deal of work in here. Cleanly, carefully, I see the 4 kinds of speech. I see the stick by the river. I see the 12 stances. I see a great deal. Mr. Potter, you are a most unusual application. Thank you, sir. Where do you wish to be sorted? Harry, who had been wondering whether he would have a preference and who had assumed until that moment that he would not, found that he did have one. He thought of Diana. He thought of her standing on the staircase at Godric's Hollow, with her arms crossed at her chest and the green light splitting around her. He thought of a princess who had crossed a veil for a stranger's baby. He thought of the courage of a woman who chose to die for a thing she had not lived long enough to love. I would like, he said, to be in the house of the brave, sir. I do not think I will fit very neatly into it. I would still like to be there, to be near the kind of bravery she had, to learn it, to honor her by trying. The hat seemed to smile inwardly. Then it shall be, it said, the brave house. Mr. Potter, you are an honor to sort. May you do well, may you do good, may we speak again. Aloud it said, Gryffindor. The Gryffindor table erupted. Harry slid off the stool. He walked to it. Ron, who had been sorted earlier, was sitting there with a face like a sunrise. Hermione, who had also been sorted earlier into Gryffindor, smiled at him with the relief of a clever, lonely girl who has just realized her two new friends had made it into the same house. Harry sat down between them. The lasso on his wrist warmed. Well done, little one, Diana said, and Harry could hear the smile in her voice. Well done, he would have approved. They both would have approved. My mother also approves, by the way. She is sitting on her terrace and clapping. She wants me to tell you that no Amazon has ever been a Gryffindor and that you are a first. Thank her, Harry said. I will, V. He learned in his first months at Hogwarts a great many things. He learned that transfiguration was a science of will. He learned that charms was a science of voice. He learned that potions was a science of attention. He learned that the potions master, a thin, sour man named Severus Snape, disliked him on sight, and that the dislike was an old dislike, transferred from a quarrel with his father. He learned this within 2 minutes of his first potions lesson and decided, mostly because Diana told him to decide, not to take it personally. He learned that flying was a thing his body knew how to do. He learned that Quidditch was a thing his body had been born for, and that one of the school sports involved being recruited onto a team as a first year, which had only happened once in a century, and that he was now that century's exception, with a broom of his own and a small private gladness about it that he was careful not to crow about because Diana had said, "Do not crow, little one. The only people who crow are people who think they are uncertain of being heard. You will be heard." He learned also, and this was the lesson that mattered, that the defense against the dark arts master, Professor Quirinus Quirrell, made the lasso burn on his wrist whenever he was in the same room. The burn was specific. It was the same burn Diana had described from the Temple of Hestia. He has Voldemort in him, little one, Diana said when Harry asked. Voldemort's wraith. He has been searching for a body since you destroyed his last. He found this man who was already weak. He has taken up residence in the back of the man's head. I can feel him from here. The lasso can feel him from there. Be careful, little one. Do not move against him until you have your audience. When will I have my audience? The Halloween feast, I think. He will try something. He has begun trying things. There has been a stone. There has been an attempt on a particular object kept in the school. He is desperate. He will, on Halloween or near it, try to manufacture a distraction. He will set loose something to occupy the staff. He will use the distraction to do whatever he means to do. You will not let him. You will instead do this. When he comes into the hall, you will rise from your bench. You will walk to him. You will, with a small flick of your wrist, draw out the lasso. You will rope him. And you will say very clearly in the hearing of every soul in the room, "Are you the man, or is he in you?" And the lasso will do what the lasso does, and the room will hear what it hears. And after that, little one, the school year and many other things will be considerably shorter than they would otherwise have been. All right, Harry had said. You are not afraid. Number good. Be still. Be patient. Be courteous. Do not show your hand until the moment. So he was still and patient and courteous, and he did not show his hand, although the hand on his wrist glowed faintly each time Quirrell came into the room. Quirrell, for his part, did not seem to notice Harry as a particular threat. He stammered. He wore a purple turban. He smelled of garlic, supposedly to ward off vampires, although Diana, who had encountered in her time a number of vampires, said this was nonsense. The garlic was masking a different smell, the smell of the host body slowly failing under its parasite. He spoke about counterjinxes in a thin voice that occasionally cleared and grew clear and almost confident, and then, as if catching himself, went back to the stammer. Harry watched all of this. Harry waited. The Halloween feast came. It came with floating pumpkins and floating candles, and a long table groaning under a great quantity of food. The students sat at the 4 long house tables. The staff sat at the high table. The headmaster, Albus Dumbledore, sat in the middle in his preposterous purple robe and his half-moon spectacles, twinkling at the room calmly, the way a man twinkles when he believes the room belongs to him. The doors of the great hall burst open. A figure ran in, Quirrell. He was sprinting. He was sprinting badly, but he was sprinting. He shrieked in his cleared voice register, "Troll, troll in the dungeons, thought you ought to know," and he collapsed theatrically, face first onto the stone floor. The hall erupted. Students screamed. The headmaster rose, raised his voice, called for calm. Prefects began herding students toward the doors. Harry, at the Gryffindor table, did not move. He looked at the figure on the floor. He looked at the headmaster. He looked at the staff. He noted with the slow, careful eye Diana had drilled into him the following: that Quirrell's collapse had been performed. That Snape at the high table had already turned to look at Quirrell with an expression of immediate suspicion. That the staff otherwise were moving, but were moving away from Quirrell, not toward him. That Quirrell on the floor had his eyes open just enough to be tracking the room. That on Harry's wrist, the lasso was almost too hot to hold against his skin. He stood up. He said very clearly, but not loudly, to Ron and Hermione, who were on either side of him, "Stay, watch. Do not interfere." He walked. He walked from his bench up the central aisle of the great hall. The hall, which had been erupting, slowed as he walked. People do this. They slow when someone moves with quiet purpose against a panicking grain. The students nearest him fell quiet first, then the ones beyond them. By the time he had reached the middle of the hall, the room was almost silent again. Even the prefects had stopped herding. Dumbledore on the dais watched. Dumbledore on the dais did not interfere. Dumbledore on the dais was, Harry noted, a man who, when something interesting was happening, had the discipline to let it happen. Harry reached Quirrell. Quirrell on the floor looked up at him. The stammer was gone from Quirrell's face, although the turban was askew. There was in the eyes a different intelligence, older, colder, evaluative. Harry said, "Stand up, please, Professor." Quirrell did not move. Harry very gently flicked his right wrist. The lasso of Hestia came down out of his sleeve in a long golden curve, the way a flag unfurls when the wind takes it. It moved the way Diana had taught it to move. It made a small sound. As it uncoiled, that was the sound of a tuning fork. The students in the hall, who had until that moment been watching a strange, small, thin first-year boy walk down their aisle, now saw instead a strange, small, thin first-year boy holding a length of golden rope which had not been on his person 2 seconds earlier, and they made, as a body, the small involuntary sound of 200 people deciding to keep watching. Harry threw the loop. It went over Quirrell's head and shoulders and snugged itself, of its own decision, around his upper arms. Quirrell was in the same motion, drawn up to his feet, not by Harry's strength, but by the lasso's will. The rope settled. It glowed gently. Quirrell stood, bound from shoulder to elbow, his turban still askew. The hall was silent. Harry said calmly, in a voice that was meant to be heard by every soul in the room, "Are you the man, or is he in you?" Quirrell's face did several things in succession. It tried to lie. It found, with the bright pressure of a hand against the chest, that lying was not available to it. It tried to seal itself, to refuse to speak, and found that closing the mouth did not work either, because the lasso did not compel words so much as it compelled honesty, and honesty in this case was a flood already coming out of him. He said in his cleared voice, "He is in me." The hall did not breathe. "Who is in you?" Harry said. Quirrell's lip trembled. Lord," the lasso pulsed gently. He had been about to say Lord Voldemort in the small groveling style he had picked up. He could not. "Use his name," Harry said. "Voldemort." It came out small and thin and almost embarrassed. "Voldemort is in me. He lives in the back of my head. He has been there since I went to Albania. I gave him my body. I drink unicorn blood to keep him alive. The blood gives him a half-life. He directs me. He sees through my eyes. He hears through my ears." The hall, on the words unicorn blood, made a sound. Hagrid, at the high table, sat down with great force. Harry said, "Why have you come to this school?" For the stone." "What stone?" "The Philosopher's Stone. The headmaster brought it here for safekeeping. He thought it was safe. We knew. We came. We have been searching for it. We have not yet found it. I was going to use the troll tonight as cover. He told me to set a troll loose in the dungeons. It is loose now. The headmaster will believe me to have fainted from the strain. The teachers will go to deal with the troll. I will slip to the 3rd corridor. I will pass the Cerberus, the dog the gamekeeper has put there, and I will reach the stone. That was the plan." "It is no longer the plan," Harry said. "No," Quirrell said. "Tell me everything you have done at this school." Quirrell told. He told for 9 minutes. The hall did not move. He told about the attempt on the stone in October. He had been the one to let the troll in the bathroom on Halloween in a different timeline, but in this one he was, more cleanly, telling. He told about the attempts to learn the protections set on the stone by each professor in turn. He told what he knew of each protection. He told about his correspondence with the Wraith in his head. He told about the Wraith. He told, at the Wraith's furious and helpless prompting from within his own skull, more of the Wraith's plans than the Wraith would have wished. The lasso compelled the man, and the man held the Wraith, and the Wraith, being held by the man being held by the lasso, could not in the end refuse to spill itself. At minute 6, Quirrell's turban shifted, and from the back of his head a small terrible face opened its eyes and stared at Harry over the man's shoulder. The face was the face Diana had described to him from Godric's hollow. The face hissed, boy, let me speak. I will speak, I will speak. Take this off me. I will speak. I have things to say to you, I will speak. Harry looked at the face calmly. He said, Lord Voldemort. The face writhed. I am here, I want to hear you. The lasso is on him. It is on you also, by extension. Speak. Tell the Hall what you intended to do tonight. Tell the Hall who you are. Tell the Hall whose servants are still alive in the wizarding world and what each of them did in the last war and whose family yours and theirs killed. The Wraith opened its mouth. It tried not to speak. It had not had a mouth in 10 years. It had forgotten how to use a mouth correctly. It tried to seal it. It could not. It spoke. It named names. It named 12 Death Eaters in the room, not in the Great Hall, but in the wider room of the country, who had bought their freedom after Voldemort's fall with the imperious defense. It named Lucius Malfoy. It named Walden Macnair. It named not Coil, Crabbe, Avery. It named 6 more. The Hall, on hearing Lucius Malfoy's name, made a sound. Draco Malfoy, at the Slytherin table, went very still and very white. The Wraith named also the Death Eaters dead and buried. It named the ones in Azkaban. It named with a peculiar bitter pride the half-blood prince it had once been, Tom Marvolo Riddle, of an orphanage in London, son of a muggle who had abandoned his witch mother, raised in poverty and shame. The genealogy which Albus Dumbledore had known and a few others had guessed, but which had never been spoken in a public hall in the wizarding country, was now known to 200 students and 40 staff, and would be in the Daily Prophet in the morning. The Wraith finished. It was by then exhausted. It had been compelled, by the lasso of Hestia and through the bound body of Quirinus Quirrell, to speak more truth in 9 minutes than it had spoken aloud in 50 years. It hung in the back of Quirrell's skull like a small drying husk. Harry said, Get out of him. The Wraith hissed, You cannot make me. Harry said, The lasso can. Get out of him. You took residence by invitation. He invited you. He is now revoking the invitation. Quirrell, say it for the room. Quirrell, who was crying now, who had been crying for several minutes and had not realized it, said, I revoke, get out of me. I am ashamed, I am sorry. I am sorry, I would like to die now, I would like to die, please. The lasso pulsed. The Wraith, which had stayed in Quirrell only by the precarious agreement of 2 desperate creatures, and which now had its agreement publicly revoked under a divine compulsion, was peeled out of the man like a piece of old wallpaper coming off a damp wall. It came out of the back of Quirrell's skull and stood, for an instant, in the middle air of the hall, a thin shadow with 2 red eye points. It looked at Harry. It looked at the lasso. It looked at the children watching. It fled. It fled out the high window of the great hall, which broke briefly to let it pass and then closed. Quirrell collapsed, properly this time, not theatrically. He went down in a heap on the stone, and he did not get up. He breathed. He cried. He had, and the school medic, Madame Pomfrey, would explain later, burned out his magical core entirely. He would not cast another spell. He would live, but he would live as a muggle. He would, in time, find this a kindness. He would never go back to a wizarding job. He would, the following year, take up a small position teaching Greek and Latin in a muggle grammar school in Yorkshire, and would do it competently and quietly until he was 63, when he would die in his sleep of a tired heart. Harry would, throughout these years, send him a Christmas card. He would always send a card back. The lasso slid off Quirrell's body. It returned of its own accord to Harry's wrist. It coiled itself and softened and was, once more, a warmth. Harry stood in the middle of the aisle in the great hall in his 2 large school robes. He looked up at the high table. He met the eyes of Albus Dumbledore. Dumbledore was looking at him with an expression Harry had never seen on an adult's face. The expression contained relief, fear, respect, consternation, a small private grief, and at the edges a small private rearrangement, the look of a man who has just had to redraw, mentally, the next 5 years of his plans. Dumbledore said into the silence, in a voice that was kept very even. Mr. Potter, yes, sir. Would you be so kind as to come to my office after the feast? Of course, sir. And Mr. Potter, yes, sir. Thank you, for our school we are in your debt. Harry inclined his head. It was the inclination Diana had taught him. It said you are welcome, and it said I have heard you, and it said we will speak more later, and it said all of these at the precise courtesy a princess of the Amazons would have used at a foreign court. Dumbledore on the dais returned the inclination. The hall, after another second, breath. A long way away, on a terrace where the sea breathed against the cliffs, a queen set down her cup of mid-morning wine and said mildly to a sister who happened to be passing, "My grandson," she said, "is having an excellent first day at school." The sister, who had no children of her own but had a great fondness for the queen's news, smiled. "Tell me," she said. The queen told. The terrace, in the warm light of a Themysciran morning, became briefly the most pleased terrace in any reality. VII. The conversation in the headmaster's office that night was the first conversation in which Harry Potter and Albus Dumbledore took each other's measure. It went, on the surface, well. They drank tea. Dumbledore offered lemon drops. Harry accepted one politely. They spoke of the lasso. Harry, after a brief inward consultation with Diana, told the headmaster the truth of where the lasso had come from. He told the story of Diana. He told it carefully, not all of it, but enough. He told the headmaster that he, Harry, had been raised in dreams by a princess of a place called Themysciran. He told the headmaster that the lasso compelled truth. He told the headmaster that, at his discretion, he intended to use the lasso to address certain other matters that the wizarding world had not yet adequately addressed. Dumbledore listened. Dumbledore did not, while listening, twinkle. Twinkling was, Harry would learn, a thing Dumbledore did with people he was managing. He did not twinkle at Harry, because he had recognized in the Great Hall that Harry could not be managed by twinkling. He listened gravely, with the attention of a man who has just discovered that one of his pieces on a long-played board is not, in fact, a pawn. At the end, Dumbledore said, "Mr. Potter, I find myself in an unusual position. I had thought for many years that I would spend the rest of my life preparing you for a particular set of difficulties. It appears now that you may have been preparing yourself. I do not yet know what to make of this. May I ask you, and I will not be offended if you decline to answer, whether you intend to use the lasso on me at some point?" "Probably, sir," Harry said. Dumbledore blinked. "You are an honest boy," he said. "I have an honest tool, sir. It has had its effects. And if I asked you not to, I would think about it, sir. I would weigh very carefully whether the asking was honest, and then I would do what was needed. I would not lasso you for fun, sir. I would lasso you only on a particular question, if there came to be one, on which the truth from you was important and could not be got otherwise. And I would tell you in advance. I would not surprise you. I think surprising you would be cruel. I have been trained not to be cruel." Dumbledore said nothing for a long second. Then he said, "By whom, Mr. Potter?" "By her, sir, by Diana. She is a presence on your wrist." "Yes, sir, and she is a kind one." "Very kind, sir. I am glad," Dumbledore said. I am glad. I will say, Mr. Potter, that I had not perhaps planned for the possibility that you would not need me to be your kind one. It is a possibility I am still adjusting to. Forgive me." "Forgiven, sir," Harry said. Dumbledore offered another lemon drop. Harry took it. They sat in the office, an old man and a small boy, and they drank tea, and they were, strangely, at the start of a kind of friendship which would last for the rest of Dumbledore's life. It would be a friendship in which the old man learned things from the small boy more often than the other way around. It would be a friendship in which the old man, several times, would set aside his old plans for the country in favor of what the small boy, in his slow, grave way, would suggest. It would be, in the end, the only friendship Albus Dumbledore had had in 40 years which had cost him, in vanity, more than it gave him in advantage. He would not regret it. Lasso on Harry's wrist would compel many people over the years. It would never need to compel the headmaster, not because the headmaster was always honest, but because the headmaster, after this night, learned to be honest with Harry whether he was being lassoed or not. The lasso noted this. The lasso approved. Diana inwardly said to Harry as he walked back to the Gryffindor Tower, "Well done, little one. We have begun. The school is yours now. The country will follow. We have a great deal of work ahead. But you have done well. The first lie has been killed. There are many more. We will work through them. We will work through them together. You and me and the lasso. As your mothers wished." "Yes, Diana," Harry said. He climbed the staircase to the tower. He went to bed. He slept well in his new dormitory in his red hangings, with the warmth on his wrist and the sound of the castle settling around him, and he dreamed of Themysciran and of his Diana and of his mother, who in the dream came to the edge of the cliffs and waved at him once, and then turned back into the light from which she had briefly come. Chapter 6, Years 2 through 4, Compressed, or How a Lasso Shortens a War. The Hogwarts of Harry Potter's second year was not the Hogwarts of any other timeline. The events of his first year had already moved through the wizarding country, the way an earthquake moves through a city built on shaky ground. The Daily Prophet had been forced, by the testimony of 200 student witnesses and 40 staff, to print, on the morning of November the 1st, every word the Wraith of Voldemort had been compelled to say in the Great Hall the night before. The names had been printed. The Death Eaters named had been brought in for questioning, over their loud objections, and over the objections of their barristers, but Lucius Malfoy in particular had been brought in. He had attempted, at the ministry, to deny everything. He had attempted to lean on his friend the minister. He had attempted to flash a small bag of galleons at one of the Aurors and to suggest a more sensible procedure. None of this had worked. He had not yet been imprisoned. The Wisengamot, half of whom were Death Eaters' friends or were themselves the named Death Eaters, was working desperately to delay matters, but he had been removed from his sinecures, his governorship of the Hogwarts board, his unofficial influence over half the ministry's offices. He had been, in the precise sense, declawed. The political shape of the country had altered. 11 other wizards had been arrested. Some had broken under questioning, others had been resilient, but the truth had been let out of the cellar, and there was no putting it back. The wizarding country had to choose, that winter, what to do with the truth. It chose, slowly and imperfectly, to act on it. 3 Death Eaters went to Azkaban properly that spring, with terms that would not be commuted. 2 more were placed under permanent surveillance. The rest had, at minimum, become socially impossible. None of them invited to ministry functions. None of them sought after at dinner parties. The protective fiction of their imperious defenses melted away in the public memory. They became what they were, pariahs. Voldemort, of course, was not done. He was, Diana said, on Harry's wrist, still a wraith, somewhere in the forests of Albania. He would try again. He would try, in particular, to find a new body. He had been deeply hurt by the events of the Great Hall, both in dignity and in the network of human assets he had once been able to depend on. But he had a kind of patience that survived such hurts. He would try again. He had, and this Diana said, gently, because Harry would need to know, split his soul into 7 pieces, of which his ruined body had been one. 6 pieces remained. 6 pieces would have to be found and destroyed before Voldemort could be properly put down. Diana told Harry the names of 3 she knew of. The others she did not yet know. Harry, who at 12 had not yet had the conversation with Albus Dumbledore that the headmaster had been planning for him at 16, had a conversation with Albus Dumbledore at 12. He sat in the headmaster's office on a Sunday afternoon in late October. He drank tea. He explained, in his slow, careful way, what Diana had told him. He named the 3 Horcruxes she knew of: a diary, given by Voldemort to Lucius Malfoy, a ring, kept in the Gaunt house in Little Hangleton, and a locket, hidden in a cave on the southern coast which Voldemort had visited as a child from his orphanage, and which he believed sentimentally inaccessible. Dumbledore listened. Dumbledore, by then, had largely stopped trying to manage Harry. He had developed in their conversations the habit of receiving Harry's information as a slightly junior colleague might receive the report of a much senior one, with attention, with note-taking, with the occasional question for clarification, with no attempt to spin. At the end, Dumbledore said, "You know more about this than I have known for 10 years, Mr. Potter. I have a better source than you do, sir." "You do indeed. Do you have any of the 3 already, sir?" I have spent the last decade looking for the diary, Mr. Potter. I had not yet identified it as belonging to Mr. Malfoy. I had thought he might know. He was, yes, I see. The diary went to him. Yes, he had a son here this year. The son has not yet, I believe, received it. Mr. Malfoy has been busy with his own affairs lately, as we know. I will visit Malfoy Manor this winter, as part of the post-trial procedural inspections, and I will look for the diary. It will probably be in the drawing-room cabinet, sir. Diana says he keeps his dangerous things there. Dumbledore inclined his head. Useful, Mr. Potter. Useful, thank you. The ring and the locket I will take. I would like also to ask, has she said anything about a Horcrux that might be at this school? Harry hesitated. There is one, sir. It is a diadem. It is in the room of requirement. She thinks it has been there since the 1940s. A diadem. Yes, sir. Ravenclaw's lost diadem. Dumbledore set down his cup. He said nothing for several seconds. Then he said, "Mr. Potter, with your permission, I would like to ask Madame Pince to make me a tea before we proceed. This has been a useful afternoon, and I find I am, for the first time in a decade, somewhat winded." "Of course, sir." The tea was made. They drank it. Dumbledore wrote in his small, precise hand a list of locations and approximate dates, and he tucked the list into his robe. And over the course of the next 9 months he and Harry, sometimes accompanied by an irritated and very thorough Severus Snape, who had developed, by then, a precarious working relationship with Harry that involved a great deal of cold civility on both sides and the occasional grudging compliment, destroyed every Horcrux except one. The diary was the first one destroyed. It is worth describing how the diary was destroyed, because the destruction of the diary was, in the original timeline, the great trial of Harry Potter's second year, and in this timeline it occupied an afternoon. The diary Lucius Malfoy, in the original timeline, had passed the diary to Ginny Weasley by slipping it into her cauldron at Flourish and Blotts in August before her first year. In this timeline he had not, because in this timeline Lucius Malfoy had spent the August in question in a holding cell at the Ministry under questioning, and had not been within 50 miles of Flourish and Blotts in any sense. The diary in this timeline had remained in the drawing room cabinet at Malfoy Manor. Dumbledore had visited Malfoy Manor in late November as part of the post-trial inspections. He had been accompanied by an Auror who had stood politely while Dumbledore exercised his particular old prerogatives. Dumbledore had looked very briefly in the drawing room cabinet. He had taken from it a small black leather-bound book with a charred-looking spine. He had said mildly, "Lucius, I will be borrowing this. I will return it when I am finished with it. It was, I notice, left out in the open. You should perhaps reflect, when you have time, on what kinds of things one leaves in cabinets one's son might find." Lucius Malfoy, who had not had a good autumn, said, "Of course, Albus." The diary had come back to Hogwarts. It had been on a December afternoon, set on Dumbledore's desk in front of Harry. Harry, with Diana on his wrist, had looked at it. He had said, "There is a piece of him in this, isn't there?" Dumbledore had said, "Yes. Will the lasso reach it?" "I do not know, Harry. I have not seen this trick attempted." Harry had flicked his wrist. The lasso had come down. He had laid it around the diary, looped, not bound, because the diary was an object, and he had said, "Speak. Whatever piece of you is in here, speak." The diary had moved. It had opened itself, the pages flipping. Ink had flowed up out of the page and into the air, and in the air the ink had taken the shape of a boy in his late teens, Tom Riddle, at 17, at the peak of his small, handsome arrogance. The boy had looked at Harry with mild contempt. The boy had said, "You will not bind me. You are 11. You." Harry had said, "I am 12. Continue." The ink boy had tried to refuse. He had tried to refuse, and as the lasso pulsed around him, he had found, as Coil had found, that he could not refuse. He had stuttered. He had hissed. He had been compelled in the headmaster's office to give an account of himself. He had given it. He had said he was a fragment of Tom Marvolo Riddle's soul, stored in the book in 1943 after he killed a girl named Myrtle in the second-floor bathroom. He had said the diary was meant to be slipped to an impressionable child, who would write in it, and whose life force the fragment would drain over a year while it grew itself back into a body of its own. He had said the next intended host had been Ginny Weasley, but that the plan had been disrupted, and that he had been simply sitting in a cabinet in Wiltshire for a year. Harry had said, "Will you tell me also where your master is now?" The ink boy had hissed, I do not know, I have been in a book." Harry had said, "Will you tell me then what you know that he knows?" The ink boy had told. He had told it in long, bitter sentences. He had named places. He had named the cave. He had described the ring. He had described the diadem. He had not known, yet, of the locket as it had been placed in the cave. That had been a later Horcrux, but he had given everything he had. He had told Harry in particular the location of the chamber under the school that Tom Riddle had opened in 1942, and the password to open it, and the name of the creature inside it. He had not wished to. The lasso had compelled him. When he was done, Dumbledore had taken a basilisk fang from his desk. He had, by then, retrieved one earlier in the year for a separate purpose, and had handed it to Harry. Harry had stabbed the diary through the heart of its open page. The ink boy had screamed. The diary had burned, very briefly, to ash. The lasso had returned to Harry's wrist. The whole episode had taken 13 minutes. The Chamber of Secrets was closed for good the following Saturday. Harry and Dumbledore went down through the second-floor bathroom, opening the entrance with the password Riddle had given them. The basilisk, a vast, ancient, blind serpent, was killed by Fawkes, the headmaster's phoenix, who put out its eyes and then, while the snake thrashed, allowed Harry to drive a fang into the roof of its mouth. They came back up. They sealed the entrance properly, with stones older than the school. Ginny Weasley, who in the other timeline would have nearly died for this, went on with her first year not knowing she had been intended for a death. Sirius Black. Sirius Black's case was resolved during Harry's third year. The case of Sirius Black in this timeline was as it had been in the others. He was in Azkaban for a crime he had not committed. He He had been thrown there in November of 1981, on the basis of his perceived role in the Potter family's destruction, and on the basis of his apparent slaughter of 12 muggles and a wizard named Peter Pettigrew. He had not been tried. He had been in his cell for 11 years. In Harry's third year, Sirius escaped. He had, in the other timelines, done so to find and kill Peter Pettigrew, who was alive and hiding as a rat in the Weasley family. In this timeline, he did the same thing. What was different was what happened when he was caught. He was caught at the end of the school year. Harry, with the help of Hermione and Ron and a small bit of nighttime errantry, had a conversation with him in the Shrieking Shack. The conversation had been more direct than the equivalent conversations of other timelines, because Harry had, with Sirius's permission, used the lasso. He had looped the man, gently, and had said, "Are you the man who killed my parents?" And Sirius had said, "No, I was their friend. I was their secret keeper for a week, and then we swapped. Pettigrew was the keeper. Pettigrew sold them. I went after him and he framed me. I have been in that cell 11 years for nothing, Harry. I would have died for them. I would die for you." And the lasso, glowing gently around his arm, had let the words come, and Harry had listened. Then they had collected Pettigrew. Pettigrew had been at Hogwarts as a rat in Ron's pocket. They went to the school. They cornered him. They turned him back into a human. They roped him. The rope on Pettigrew had been the cleanest thing Harry had ever done. Pettigrew had screamed, "Harry, Harry, your father would have wanted, your father would have understood your father," and Harry had said, "You will not use his name in your bargaining. Tell me what you did. Tell me everything you did." Pettigrew told. He told it standing in the middle of the Hogwarts gamekeeper's hut, with Hagrid and Dumbledore and Snape and McGonagall and 3 Aurors in attendance. He told that he had been the secret keeper of the Fidelius charm placed on the Potter cottage. He told that he had given the secret to Voldemort. He told that he had killed 12 muggles to fake his own death after Sirius had cornered him. He told that he had hid for 11 years as a rat in the Weasley family, eating from the Weasleys' table, accepting their kindness, sleeping in their beds while pretending to be a domestic animal. He told that he had done all of this from fear, only fear, never conviction, only fear, only fear, only fear, and that the fear had not in the end been a moral defense. Sirius Black was acquitted. The Aurors took Pettigrew. Pettigrew was given the kiss the following morning, after a brief Wisengamot session at which his confession, recorded under the lasso, was played in its entirety. Sirius Black, free for the first time in 11 years, came to Harry's room at Hogwarts the next day. He stood in the doorway. He did not at first come in. He looked at Harry. Harry looked at him. Sirius said very quietly, I was your godfather, you know. I was meant to raise you. If anything happened, they had told me I was. I was so sure you would be raised by your mother. I had hardly thought what it would mean. And then they were gone, and I was after Peter, and I was in the cell, and there was nothing I could do for you. For 11 years, I cannot get those years back, Harry. I cannot. I do not know what I can offer you instead. Harry stood up from his bed. He went to the doorway. He looked up at the gaunt, thin man with the haunted eyes who was his father's best friend, whom he had never met, whom he should have been raised by, who had been in a cell for a crime he had not committed for a decade of Harry's life. He said, Sirius, stay for the rest of the term. Have meals here. Be here when I come out of class. Eat with us. Walk on the grounds. I would like you to know my friends. I would like to know you. I do not need years back, Sirius. I have had a different kind of upbringing than I would have had with you. It has not been wholly bad. I had someone else looking after me. I will tell you about her if you want. What I would like is for you to be in my life now, not later, not for some future restored childhood. Now, as you are tired, alive, mine. Sirius's face did several things. He sat down, properly sat down on the floor of Harry's doorway with his back against the doorframe, and he cried. He cried the way men cry who have not been able to cry for a long time. He cried like he was being told he was forgiven for something he had not, in fact, done. He cried for his friends. He cried, perhaps, for the cell. Harry sat down beside him and put his hand on Sirius's shoulder and did not speak. After a while, Sirius's crying eased. Sirius wiped his face on the sleeve of his prison robes. All right, Harry, he said. All right, I'll stay. Sirius stayed. He stayed for the rest of the term, and then he came back for the summer, and Petunia and Vernon, well, Petunia did not exactly like Sirius. Sirius did not exactly like her. But Petunia, who had by then been bending for some years, made up the spare bedroom for him, and Vernon, who had been resigned for some years, stayed out of the kitchen when Sirius was in it. Sirius, who had also been bending for some years in his cell, made an effort. The 4 of them ate dinner together 6 times that August. None of the dinners were comfortable. None of them were disasters either. The lasso on Harry's wrist watched them and noted them and approved. The world, the lasso had been saying for years, was a thing of small, slow adjustments. The Dursleys' kitchen and Harry's godfather and his aunt and uncle being able to sit at the same table for 3/4 of an hour without anyone needing to leave was, by the lasso's reckoning, a small, slow adjustment of the kind that mattered. Sirius was, by the end of the summer, on speaking terms with Petunia. Petunia, by the end of the summer, had cooked Sirius a meal he liked. Vernon, by the end of the summer, had asked Sirius one question about a particular cricket match. Sirius had answered the question. Vernon had nodded. This was, by Vernon's standards, an embrace. Aye. The Triwizard year, the Triwizard tournament arrived in Harry's 4th year, as it would have in any timeline. It was an old tradition revived for a school exchange. There were students from Beauxbatons and from Durmstrang. There was a goblet that selected 3 champions. Harry, who was 14 and not interested in dying for a trophy, watched the goblet with the slow, patient attention he had developed. On the night of selection, the goblet selected Cedric Diggory of Hufflepuff, for Hogwarts, Fleur de Lacre, for Beauxbatons, Victor Crumb, for Durmstrang. It also, after a long pause, ejected a 4th piece of parchment. The 4th piece of parchment bore Harry's name. This, in any other timeline, would have produced a great fuss, an inquiry, an investigation, and an entire year of dangerous events for Harry. In this timeline, what it produced was as follows. Harry stood up, walked to the goblet, and looked at the parchment in Dumbledore's hand. He said, "Sir." "Yes, Mr. Potter." "Whose handwriting is this?" Dumbledore looked at it. "Yours, Mr. Potter, or an unusually careful copy of yours." "It is not mine, sir. Number, who at this school has been close enough to me recently to study my handwriting carefully?" A long silence. Then Dumbledore said, "Several people, of course, Mr. Potter. Your teachers, and one in particular. Sir, would you be so good as to call up to the high table the defense against the dark arts master, Professor Moody, just for a moment." The defense master that year was the famous Auror Alastair, Mad-Eye Moody. He had, Diana had been telling Harry for 2 months, not been quite himself. His magical eye twitched at odd moments. He drank from a hip flask which Diana believed contained polyjuice potion. He had been, of late, behaving in subtle ways that did not match the personality of the man Sirius described from Old Order days. Dumbledore looked at Harry. He looked at the goblet. He said, very quietly, to McGonagall, "Minerva, bring Alastair down here, would you?" McGonagall went up to fetch him. Moody, who had been watching the proceedings with sharp interest, was reluctant to come, but came. He clumped down the staff steps and across the hall on his wooden leg. He stopped in front of the goblet. Harry, in the silence of 250 students and 40 staff and 3 visiting champions, flicked his wrist. The lasso came out. It dropped over Moody gently and settled around his upper arms. The man flinched. Harry said, "Are you Alastair Moody?" The lasso pulsed. The man could not lie. He said, "Number." The hall began to make a sound. Dumbledore raised a hand. The sound subsided. Harry said, "Who are you?" The man trembled. Bartemius Crouch, Jr. I am Crouch's son. I escaped my father, Polyjuice. Moody is in his own trunk in his quarters. I have been brewing it. I have his hair. He is in the trunk." Harry said, "Why are you here?" To win the boy. To win you. To put your name in the goblet. To ensure you reached the 3rd task. To make the 3rd task. The 3rd task is a maze. There is a portkey at its center. I was to enchant the portkey to take you to a graveyard. The Dark Lord, he is in Albania still. He has a homunculus form, a thing my father's old elf brought back from there, but it is small and weak and ugly. He needs 3 ingredients. Bone of the father, unknowingly given. Flesh of the servant, willingly given. Blood of the enemy, forcibly taken. The graveyard is his father's. The flesh is mine. The blood was to be yours. A long silence. Harry said very calmly, "Tell the headmaster, please, where Mr. Moody is being kept." In the trunk in my office, the 7th compartment." Dumbledore turned to McGonagall and Snape. "Go," he said. They went. Harry said, "Tell the hall, please, what you have done at this school since the start of term." Crouch told. He told everything. He told that he had been a Death Eater. He told that he had murdered his own father a month ago and buried him on the grounds. He told that he had been smuggling messages to his master. He told that his master's homunculus was hidden in a country house in Albania belonging to one of Voldemort's old allies. He gave the address. He gave the address of the house in which Voldemort's homunculus was, in this very minute, in a wicker cradle, being fed unicorn blood by a one-handed servant. The hall sat very still. Harry said, "Thank you, Mr. Crouch." Dumbledore on the dais said to the Aurors at the door who had been there for the goblet ceremony, "Take him. Use the Veritaserum after, as a formality. He has, as you can see, already said much. We will deal with the rest at the ministry." The Aurors came. Crouch went. Harry pulled the lasso back. He looked at Cedric Diggory, standing somewhat dazedly to one side. He smiled at him gently. "Cedric," he said, "I think the tournament is cancelled for the year. I am sorry. You would have done very well, I think." Cedric, who had not been killed in this timeline, would never be killed in this timeline, said, "Thank you, Harry. I will live with the disappointment, I think." The hall laughed. It was a small laugh after a tense long several minutes, but it was a real one. Dumbledore raised his voice. "We will adjourn the tournament. The visiting schools will, with their headmasters, decide whether to remain at Hogwarts for the term as guests or to return home. They are, of course, welcome to stay. The Goblet of Fire will not be used again this season. I owe an apology to all our visitors for the manner of this evening. I would like in particular to thank Mr. Potter, who has, by becoming what he is in his time, quite simply spared us a far worse evening." He looked at Harry. Harry inclined his head. The lasso warmed. IV. Voldemort's homunculus the night after Crouch's exposure, an Auror-Strike team, accompanied by Albus Dumbledore, and against everyone's protest, Harry Potter, raided the country house in Albania. They found the wicker cradle. They found the homunculus, a thing perhaps a foot and a half long, with red eyes and a thin reedy voice and the magical aura of a power once enormous and now starved. They found the one-handed servant. Wormtail had been one, but this servant was someone else, a man Crouch had recruited from among the few remaining loyalists. They found also 3 Horcruxes, which Voldemort had moved from their original hiding places after the events of Harry's first year. The locket, the ring, which had been retrieved and replaced by Dumbledore and stolen back by the servant, and the cup of Helga Hufflepuff, which Voldemort had recovered from his goblin contacts in the chaos following his fall. These had been collected near the homunculus, perhaps in a vain attempt to give the homunculus more stability. The strike team destroyed the Horcruxes on the spot. Fiendfire, properly contained, ate them all in a single bright minute. The Auror leader, a careful woman named Amelia Bones, supervised personally. The homunculus itself was harder to destroy. It was, Diana said quietly to Harry as the team prepared, a soul piece in its own right. Though housed in a small homunculus body, it had been growing from a magical broth. It was not yet a Horcrux fragment proper. It was more accurately the 7th piece of Voldemort's torn soul, the original piece that had once been his body. Harry knelt by the cradle. He flicked his wrist. The lasso came out. He laid it gently around the homunculus. The homunculus opened its red eyes. It looked at him. It said in a thin, reedy voice that was, even at that size, unmistakably the voice from Quirrell's turban, You will be killed for this. I will find a body. I will be reborn. I will," Harry said quietly. "No, you will not." He looked up at Dumbledore. "Sir, the lasso will hold him while you do what is needed. He should not be allowed to flee from this body. The body is more permanent than his other forms. If he is killed in this body and the Horcruxes have all been destroyed, he will not have anywhere to retreat to. He will be destroyed." Dumbledore said, "There is one Horcrux yet, Harry." Harry, holding the rope, said, "Yes, sir, there is." Dumbledore said gently, "You know then." "I have known for some time, sir. Diana told me. There is a piece of him in me, my scar. I have been carrying it since I was 15 months old." Dumbledore's face was grave. Harry, if we destroy this homunculus while a piece of him is still in you, it will not anchor him, sir. It is not," Diana has explained, "it is not a proper Horcrux. It is a fragment by accident, not by design. He did not mean to put it in me. It cannot hold him after his other Horcruxes are gone. He will pass through it on his way out. It will burn out of me. I will be in some pain. I will live. The lasso has taught me what to do." Dumbledore looked at him. He said very quietly, "Harry, I would have spared you this if I could." "I know, sir. Are you ready?" "Yes." Dumbledore raised his wand. He said the killing curse. Not at the homunculus directly. The killing curse cast at a Horcrux can rebound dangerously, but at the cradle, which had been keeping the homunculus alive, with the fiendfire wards primed at the lasso's edge. The cradle came apart in green light and then in bright orange fire. The homunculus screamed. The wraith inside it tried to flee. The lasso held it. The lasso bound it to the dying body. The wraith struggled. The wraith, for one terrible second, tried to flee through Harry. It tried to use the scar fragment in Harry's forehead as an escape hatch. It hit the lasso again, coming the other way. It found, as it had found at Halloween 3 years before, that the lasso did not negotiate. The lasso simply held. The scar on Harry's forehead burned. It burned. It burned. It was, Harry would say later when asked, the worst pain of his life by a factor of 7. He would only ever feel one worse pain, and that would come at the Department of Mysteries, and even that pain would be of a different shape. The scar burned. The fragment in it was being pulled out, fighting all the way. It came out. It came out the way a splinter comes out of a thumb, a long buried splinter, festering for years, when the surgeon, with patient pliers, takes it out at last. The fragment came out. The lasso took it, the lasso fed it to the fire. The fragment burned, the homunculus burned. The wraith, what was left of it, perhaps a 16th of its original being, slithered out of the burning cradle and out the window of the country house and into the Albanian night, screaming very faintly. It would, Diana said, take it years to rebuild itself from this. It might never rebuild itself at all. It had now, finally, only its own naked self, with no Horcrux anchors, no homunculus body, no possessed host. It was a thing of pure hatred drifting through the world looking for a host weak enough to take it. Voldemort's body would not be reborn. Voldemort's wraith would have one more chance. Harry knew this. Diana told him on the airplane, a ministry-chartered one with oars and a press blackout on the way back from Albania, that this was the case. He has one piece left, little one, the smallest piece of him. He will spend it trying to take possession of someone, many people perhaps. He will go for the easiest minds. He will go for the wizarding country's politicians perhaps. He will go for the Wisengamot. He will go for anyone he can. He has lost almost everything. He has only the wish to harm you. He will harm any number of people on the way to you, given the chance. We must give him a chance. We must let him come to us, on a battlefield of our choosing. The Department of Mysteries, I think. There is a prophecy there about him and about you. He will go for it. He will lure you with a vision. You will pretend to be lured. You will, in fact, be in control. You will let him bring himself to where we can finish him. Are you with me, little one? Yes, Diana, Harry said. It will be difficult. He is, even in this reduced state, a clever wraith. He will surprise us. He will hurt people we love. He will hurt some people we love, little one. I cannot promise we will all come out of it. You must be ready. I am ready. You have been ready for some time. I have done my work. The work was in the end simple. You were a kind child. I have only made you a brave one as well. Diana. Yes, little one. Thank you. I do not say it often. I should say it more. Thank you. Thank you for everything. Thank you for the place. Thank you for the figs. Thank you for the stances. Thank you for the 4 kinds of speech. Thank you for the stick by the river. Thank you for the lessons about Aunt Petunia. Thank you for being inside my wrist for all these years. Thank you for choosing me. Little one, I did not choose you. The lasso chose me. I followed it. We were chosen for each other. The choice was love's, not mine. I am only grateful every day that the choice fell on you. You are my own son in every way that matters. My mother loves you. Your other mother loves you wherever she is now. Your aunt is learning to. Your godfather already does. There is a great deal of love in your life, little one. You have made it. You have made it by being who you are. You have done the work, Diana. Yes, when this is over, when the wraith is dead, will I still see you? In dreams, a long, soft pause. I do not know, little one. The lasso may go to a temple. The temple is, perhaps, where it belongs. It may stay with you. It may leave. I will be in it, wherever it is. If it stays with you, I will be with you. If it goes, I will go also. But you will not be alone, little one. Not ever. Not even if the lasso goes back to Hestia. You have learned in the years I have been with you how not to be alone. You have learned how to be a person who fits in the world. That is not a thing the lasso did. That is a thing you did. The lasso is a tool. You are the one who used it. You will be all right, little one. I promise you. The airplane went on through the night. Harry slept against the window, with the lasso warm on his wrist, dreaming of cliffs and a sea that breathed, and Albania receded behind them, and far away in the dark, a wraith small enough now to fit in a hummingbird's wing began to drift westward, looking for a way back to England, looking for a way back to a fight it would not survive. Chapter 7. The Department of Mysteries. The wraith came for him in the early summer of Harry's 5th year. It came not boldly but obliquely, the way a thin small thing comes, drifting first into the dreams of small unguarded people in important offices, sniffing at their thoughts the way a moth sniffs at a lamp, finding which of them had the easiest minds and the loosest defenses. Several of them did. The wizarding world had been shaken by the previous 3.5 years. Many of its mid-level officials had developed small private resentments against Albus Dumbledore, against Harry Potter, against the New Order which had brought their old colleagues to trial. The wraith found these resentments and ate them. It used the resentments as a kind of food. It found in particular one Dolores Jane Umbridge, senior undersecretary to the Minister for Magic. Dolores Umbridge was a small, pink, stout woman with a voice like a child's voice and a heart like a child's hand around a small, struggling thing. She had been suspected, by the lasso, by Diana, by Harry, for some time of being a vessel suitable to Voldemort's small ambitions. She had been in this timeline, as in all timelines, one of those ministry officials who had survived the political earthquake of Harry's first year by virtue of being too low and too pink to be seriously noticed. She had used the chaos to climb. By April of Harry's 5th year, she was at the minister's elbow, whispering. By May, she had drafted, on the minister's behalf, 3 increasingly hysterical decrees about the Hogwarts headmaster's overreach. By the start of June, she had, in a piece of quiet political theater, convinced the minister to dispatch her to Hogwarts as a senior inspector, with the authority to override the headmaster on disciplinary matters. She had come to the castle. She had come, although she did not know it, with the wraith of Voldemort coiled in the back of her small pink mind like a millipede coiled in a sock. She had taken up residence in a tower office. She had begun, in her small high voice, to issue decrees. She had begun to summon students one at a time and to ask them about their teachers, about Harry Potter, about Dumbledore, about what they had heard from their parents at home. She had begun, Diana said, on Harry's wrist during the first week of her residency to recruit. The wraith was finding, through her, other minds it might soon possess. She was a pump now. She drew small loyalties into her parlor and pumped them into the wraith's reservoir. Harry waited. He waited with the great patience Diana had taught him. He did not lasso Umbridge in the corridor. He did not expose her at breakfast. He had learned by now that the lasso was a tool of decisive moments, and that decisive moments were created by patience as much as by courage. He let Umbridge issue her decrees. He let her interview students. He let her, at one point, in a defense lesson, attempt to give him a detention with a blood quill. Diana had warned him about the quill in advance. He had attended the detention. He had brought a small jar of healing salve and a pair of dragonhide gloves, both bought by Sirius and shipped to the school. He had used the salve. He had said nothing about the gloves. He had let Umbridge believe she was hurting him. She had been satisfied. The lasso had noted dryly that her satisfaction was a useful data point. He let her also send him a vision. The vision came in late May. It came in a dream which was not the place. It came in a dream which was, instead, the long stone corridor of the Department of Mysteries, black floors, blue-flamed sconces, a circular room with 12 doors that spun, a hall of prophecies with rows of small glowing orbs receding into a distance that did not, even in dreams, end. In the vision, Sirius, who was alive and well and presently at Grimmauld Place in London, sleeping in his old childhood bed, was on the floor of the Hall of Prophecies being tortured by an unseen figure. Harry saw him. Harry in the vision knew where the hall was. Harry in the vision knew that there was a particular shelf, a particular orb with his name and Voldemort's on it. He woke. He sat up in his four-poster. He felt Diana on his wrist, warm, attentive. "Lass," he said. Was that real? It was sent," Diana said. "It was the wraith, through her. She did not know. She does not understand half of what passes through her now. The wraith is using her. Sirius is at Grimmauld Place. He is fine. I have checked. The wind tells me. The wraith would like you to come to the Department of Mysteries tonight. The wraith would like you to bring your friends, perhaps. The wraith would like you, in particular, to take the prophecy off its shelf. The prophecy is the only thing that can be removed from that shelf by you or by Voldemort. It would like you to bring it down for it. It would like you, having done so, to be killed before you could speak it. The wraith would then, in the confusion, attempt a mass possession. Many of its Death Eater's children are likely to be in the Ministry's halls tonight, brought there for various legitimate-seeming reasons, by Umbridge or by their own parents. The wraith intends to leap from Umbridge into many of them at once. It intends to multiply itself by division, to spread itself thin across a dozen new bodies. If it does this, little one, we may be hunting it for the rest of your life. We must prevent it. Tonight is the night. How do we prevent it? We go. We let it think we are coming for the bait. We bring the bait, the prophecy, out of its shelf. We carry it back to the room with 12 doors. There we meet the wraith. We bind it, and we ask it the questions it cannot answer except by destroying itself. What questions? The questions about itself. The questions about what it has been. The questions about what it has done. The wraith is, by its own actions over 50 years, a thing assembled from lies. Lies it told its followers. Lies it told its mother. Lies it told its enemies. Lies it told itself. We will, with the lasso, compel it to know itself. It cannot. It has no self that survives knowing. We will end it by making it look in the mirror. Harry thought about this. He said, it is a strange kind of weapon. Diana said, it is the only kind of weapon, little one, that works on a creature like him. You cannot kill him with a sword. He has died of swords twice. You cannot kill him with curses. He has eaten curses. You can only kill him with the one thing he has spent his whole life avoiding, which is honesty about who he is. That is what the lasso is. That is what the lasso has always been. The lasso is not, in its deepest sense, a rope. The lasso is a mirror. We are going to make him look. Right, Harry said. Bring your friends, little one. I will. He brought Ron and Hermione. He brought Neville Longbottom, who had grown over the past 4 years into a quietly formidable young man and who had wanted nothing in his life so much as to look his parents' tormentors in the eye. He brought Ginny Weasley, who at 14 had become, by virtue of having had a year of quiet protection by Harry's careful management of her brother, a more confident and more dangerous young witch than she had been in any other timeline. He brought Luna Lovegood because Luna had asked, and Luna had a kind of seeing that the lasso liked. He brought no one else. They went by the Stral, 6 of them that night. The Ministry at night was a strange place. The black-tiled atrium was empty. The golden fountain trickled. The lifts ran without conductors. The 6 of them rode a lift down to the 9th level. The corridor of the Department of Mysteries was as it had been in Harry's dream. Black floor, blue sconces, the door at the end. They opened it. The circular room of 12 doors spun, as Diana had said it would. Hermione marked the door they had come through with a flame-freezing charm, a small clever thing of her own invention, which left a softly glowing X on the door. They took the door that, by Diana's whisper, led to the Hall of Prophecies. They went down it. They came to the hall. The hall was as in the dream. Long rows, shelves, orbs, cobwebs, a particular shelf, row 97, marked. A particular orb with 2 names written under it in tiny silver script, SPT to APWBD, Dark Lord and Harry Potter. Harry took it down. He cradled it. He felt, even through the glass, the small ringing of a long-ago prophecy, made by Sybil Trelawney to Albus Dumbledore in a Hog's Head room some 14 years ago. He did not look at the prophecy. He turned. He said to his friends, "Back." They began to walk back. The Death Eaters appeared between the shelves. There were 11 of them. There would have been more in another timeline. Many of the Death Eater roster had been imprisoned since Harry's first year, and only 11 of the surviving free agents had been mustered for this errand. They came in robes and masks. They surrounded the 6 children. The lead Death Eater, Lucius Malfoy, although his mask was on, said in his familiar, light, cold voice, "Mr. Potter, hand it over." Harry, holding the orb, said, "Number, you are 6 children. We are 11 adults. You are armed with wands." "We are armed with wands. We have the spell experience. You have a piece of clever glass. Hand it over, Mr. Potter, and we will let your friends walk out." "You will not let my friends walk out, Mr. Malfoy. I will let you walk out, depending on how you behave." He flicked his wrist. The lasso came out of his sleeve. He had practiced, in the 4 years since Quirrell, many forms of the cast. He had practiced the short toss, the long throw, the lassoing of 3 things at once. He had practiced the fan cast, where the rope split itself, with the lasso's permission, into several smaller ropes, each compelled by its own purpose. He had practiced this last cast carefully, because he had suspected he would need it. He used it now. The lasso flowered out of his hand. It split. Went out as 11 separate slim cords, each finding a Death Eater's neck or wrists, each settling there with the calm certainty of a hand on a steering wheel. 11 Death Eaters froze. 11 Death Eaters discovered that the lasso of Hestia, when it was distributed, was no less itself for being 11 things at once. 11 of them tried to lift their wands. 11 of them found their wands had become, in their hands, very heavy. Harry said, "Drop your wands." 11 wands clattered to the floor. "Step back from us 3 paces. 11 Death Eaters stepped back 3 paces. "Stand still. Listen, none of you will speak unless I ask you to. I am going to ask each of you in turn a small set of questions. You will answer them. The questions will be your name, your role in the First War, your role in the night the homunculus was destroyed in Albania, your role this evening. You will answer in your own voices, not your master's. Do you understand?" 11 masks moved fractionally. 11 heads nodded. Hermione, on Harry's left, said quietly, "Harry, what are we just going to interview them?" "For the moment, yes. They will be useful as evidence. I will keep the lasso on them. I am going to ask Ron to be so kind as to send a patroness to Dumbledore and to Madame Bones at the Auror office. They should be here in a minute. Then we will continue. Ron." Ron raised his wand. He had been practicing the patroness for 2 years. Sirius had taught him in the summers. A small terrier flickered into being, alert. Ron whispered to it. It bounded away through the shelves. "Now," said Harry, "begin, you masked one on the end, your name." The Death Eater on the end said, "Bellatrix Lestrange." A small ripple went through the children. Neville's face, Harry saw out of the corner of his eye, set. "Bellatrix Lestrange. Your role in the First War." She gave it. She gave it in her own voice. She had killed in the First War and in the years after more than 50 people. She named them. She named, when prompted, Frank and Alice Longbottom, whom she had tortured into madness in 1981. Neville Longbottom, standing 2 paces behind Harry, did not move. His face was wet. He listened. He had wanted in many smaller moments of his life to be standing in a room where Bellatrix Lestrange was forced to speak the names of his parents and explain what she had done to them. He was now in such a room. He listened. "Continue," Harry said. She continued. She told what she had done at the end of the First War. She told that she had been imprisoned in Azkaban for 13 years. She told that the Wraith had 8 days ago sent her, through a thinning in the wards, the means to escape. She told that she had been recruited tonight with these others for this errand. She told that she had been promised by the Wraith that she would be permitted to kill Harry Potter herself with her own wand. She told the room dispassionately of the dreams of cruelty she had had in Azkaban, of all the ways she had practiced, mentally, the killing she had been refused for 13 years. She told them in the flat voice of a person who had been forced, by the lasso, to know what she was. Her voice grew thinner as she spoke. The certainty in it grew thinner. By the end of her recitation, she was a small huddled thing in a mask, panting. Neville stepped forward. Harry said gently, "Neville." "I'm all right, Harry," Neville said. "I just want her to take the mask off." Harry, with a flick of the lasso, made Bellatrix take her mask off. She did so. Her face, for the first time in 14 years out of Azkaban's stone, was bare in a room full of strangers. It was the face of a woman who had been beautiful and had spent her beauty on hatred and was now, in the late 40s, a wreck. Neville looked at her. He did not curse her. He did not strike her. He looked at her for a long, quiet second. Then he said, "I am Neville Longbottom. I am Frank and Alice's son. I have wanted to be in a room with you for 13 years. I have wanted to ask you a question. The question is, do you remember their faces?" She tried to refuse. The lasso held. She said in a voice that was, for the first time, a person's voice rather than a Death Eater's, "Yes, I remember their faces." Neville said, "Thank you." He turned away. He stood by Ginny. He did not cry. He did not speak again for several minutes. He had what he had come for. Harry continued. He went to each of the other Death Eaters in turn. He took their masks. He took their names. He took from each a brief truth. What they had done in the war and afterward, what they had done tonight. The lasso compelled. The Death Eaters spoke. Each of them spoke in a slightly diminished voice, speaking what they were allowed in front of children in the small, clear blue light of the prophecy hall was eroding them. Lucius Malfoy spoke last. He gave his full inventory. He had, Harry was unsurprised to hear, done many things he had managed, for 13 years, not to acknowledge to himself. He acknowledged them now. He acknowledged them in the hearing of his 11 peers and the 6 children, and by this time Albus Dumbledore, who had arrived with Madame Bones and 6 Aurors and was standing at the far end of the Hall of Prophecies, watching. Dumbledore had not interrupted. Madame Bones had not interrupted. The 6 Aurors were taking notes. Aye. When the Death Eaters had each spoken, Harry said calmly, "Madame Bones, they are yours. They have confessed in your presence. The lasso has been on them throughout. I will release them into your custody. They will not resist." Madame Bones nodded once. She turned to her Aurors. The Aurors stepped forward with cuffs. Harry flicked his wrist. The lasso came back to him. 11 Death Eaters were arrested. None resisted. Some of them, in the way of broken people, had become very docile in the past quarter of an hour. They would never again be entirely the same people they had been. They would be tried. They would be convicted. They would go to Azkaban, except for Lucius Malfoy, who would, by the careful efforts of his wife and his son, both of whom would in the months after this night make a number of small private moral choices in better directions, receive a reduced sentence with house arrest and a public oath of restitution. Lucius Malfoy, when he finally died in his bed at 80, would have spent the last 30 years of his life writing letters of apology and small reparations checks to families he had once harmed. He would not perhaps ever become a good man, but he would become a less bad one, which was the most the lasso ever asked of anyone. Harry, when the Death Eaters had been taken, said to Dumbledore, "Sir, Umbridge, she is here. She came in behind us. I felt the Wraith pass into the ministry behind us. She is somewhere in the building. She is, I think, in the circular room, or beyond it. The Wraith has, split itself for the leap. She is the largest piece, but the leap has begun. We must do it now. Lead the way, Harry." They went back. They went out of the Hall of Prophecies, down the corridor, into the circular room of 12 doors. The doors no longer spun. They were still. Hermione's X glowed on one of them. The room was lit only by the blue flame sconces, and in the middle of the room, a small pink shape. Dolor's Umbridge stood there. She was not, by then, exactly herself. Her face had a peculiar flatness. Her eyes were not focused. She had in her right hand a wand which was being held not for any spell but for ceremony, the way a child holds a doll's hand. The Wraith spoke through her. It said, "Potter." It said it in a voice that was Umbridge's voice mostly, but with another voice woven through. A thin, dry, ancient voice with no warmth in it, the same voice that had come from Quirrell's turban and the homunculus's cradle and the diary's ink boy. Harry said, "Tom." The wraith said. I do not, that is not what I am called, Harry said. Tom Marvolo Riddle. Born of Merope Gaunt and Tom Riddle Sr. in an orphanage in London in 1926. That is the name your mother wished to call you, the mother who died for you, the mother whose name you took once and never used again. We will use it now, Tom. The wraith's stolen face shuddered. It said, I will not be lassoed by a child. Harry said, you will. He flicked his wrist. The lasso came out. It came out at its full length, longer than he had ever drawn it. It moved through the blue-flamed room not in a single rope but in a long, flowering spiral. It went around the small pink woman, and around the air she stood in and around the thin shadow that lived inside her, and it tightened, and Umbridge's body sagged, and from above her shoulders the wraith of Voldemort lifted into the air, held by the lasso, no longer hidden in its host. The wraith struggled. The lasso held. The wraith was a much smaller thing than it had been 3 years before on Quirrell's turban. It was a fragment of a fragment, a thin smoky shape with 2 pinpoint red eyes. It writhed. Harry said, Tom, I am going to ask you questions now. The lasso will hold you while you answer them. You will answer because you cannot, in the lasso's bind, lie to yourself. I am Lord Voldemort, You are Tom Marvolo Riddle. You are also Lord Voldemort. Those are 2 names of the same person. We will use the older one. Tom, how many pieces of your soul exist tonight? The wraith hissed. It tried to refuse. It found, as the others had found, that the lasso did not negotiate. It also found something else, which was that this lasso was not, as the lasso on Quirrell had been, only compelling outward speech. This lasso was compelling inward knowledge. The wraith was being made to look with its own eyes at the wreckage of itself. The wraith said in a thin voice, 1. Where is it? Here, where you have me. How many pieces of your soul existed 3 months ago? 8. Where were they 3 months ago? The wraith named them. The diary destroyed by you. The ring destroyed by Dumbledore. The locket destroyed in Albania. The cup of Helga Hufflepuff destroyed in Albania. The diadem of Rowena Ravenclaw destroyed by Dumbledore last summer at the school. The fragment in Harry's scar destroyed at the Albanian house. The homunculus destroyed at the Albanian house. The wraith itself here. You have then exactly 1 piece left. Yes, and the piece you have is what I am holding. Yes, Tom, why did you split your soul? The wraith was silent. The lasso pulsed. The wraith spoke. Because I was afraid of dying. I was afraid of dying. I have been afraid of dying since I was 11 years old. I have been afraid since I learned what it was. I did not want to die. I would do anything not to die. I would split myself into pieces. I would kill anyone. I would kill to not die. I have been afraid. Of what, Tom? Of being nothing. Of being like the men who came and went around the orphanage. Of being ordinary, of being unloved, of being unremembered, the wraith broke off. It struggled in the rope. Of being forgot. And what have you done, Tom, with that fear? The wraith, the small pinpointed shadow, began in some fashion to weep. It is hard to describe the weeping of a thing that does not have eyes. Harry would describe it later, in his journal, as a kind of fraying, a giving way of the integrity of the shadow's surface. The wraith fragmented in places. Bits of it slewed off and dissolved in the blue-flamed air. The wraith said, I have made a war. I have killed hundreds of people. I have asked my followers to kill thousands. I killed my father. I killed my grandfather and my uncle and put the murder on my uncle. I killed a girl in the second-floor bathroom of my school when I was a boy. I killed my mother's only friend. I built a country of killers, and I used them to kill, and the killing did not solve. The killing did not give you what, Tom? Give me what my mother could not give me. Give me. Love, Tom? Yes, said the wraith. Yes, I wanted to be loved. I wanted to be loved like the other boys at the orphanage were loved, by their mothers who came on Sundays. I wanted a Sunday mother. I wanted a Sunday. Stop it. You are, I am Lord Voldemort. I am the most feared wizard in. You are Tom Marvolo Riddle. You are a small frightened boy from an orphanage, and you have been frightened for 69 years, and the fright has made you a murderer, and the murders have not done what you wanted them to do. Has the lasso compelled you to know this, Tom? The wraith, what was left of it, said, yes. Have you ever in your life looked in the mirror and seen yourself? The wraith said, look now. The lasso pulsed. The wraith was made to see itself. It was made to see itself as it was. A fragment of a soul, smaller than a hummingbird's wing, hanging in a blue-lit room in the underbelly of the Ministry of Magic, surrounded by a small group of children who had outwitted it, and a small group of Aurors who were taking notes, and a young Auror sergeant who would later in her career write a textbook on this evening's events, and the old man who had been its teacher when it had been a boy, and the boy who was its mirror. The wraith was made to see itself for 40 long seconds. The lasso did not break the gaze. The wraith dissolved. It did not scream. It did not, in the end, even resist. It looked at itself for 40 seconds, and the looking was enough. There was no self left in it to bear the looking, because there had never been very much self there in the first place, and what little there had been long ago eaten away by horror at itself. The wraith fragmented and fragmented again, into smaller and smaller particles, and then into a kind of gray dust, and then into nothing at all. The lasso, finding its target gone, drew itself back into Harry's sleeve. Umbrage on the floor, breath. She breathed in the small, confused way of a person who has woken from a long and unpleasant dream. She would not, for the rest of her life, remember exactly what she had been doing for the past 6 weeks. She would understand in some general way that she had been used. She would, in the aftermath, be removed from ministry service, charged with a number of small abuses she did remember, and sent to a kind of facility where the abuses could be addressed. She would, in time, become a quiet pink old woman who knitted in a small flat in Brighton and did not return to public life. She would die at 73 of a heart attack. None of her many failings would ever again involve the Dark Lord. The Hall of Prophecies behind them was empty. The Department of Mysteries was empty. The ministry was empty. Harry stood in the middle of the circular room of 12 doors. His friend stood behind him. Dumbledore stood at the far end with Madame Bones. The 6 Aurors stood with their notes. The wraith of Voldemort had been dead for 10 seconds. He had been dead for 10 seconds. It is necessary to mark this. There would later be debate, in scholarly journals and in barroom arguments, about whether the wraith had been killed by Harry Potter or had killed itself. The truth, the Lasso of Hestia would have said, was both. The wraith had been brought to the point of self-knowledge by Harry. It had been killed by self-knowledge. Harry had been the one who held the mirror. The wraith had been the one who could not bear its own face. Both contributed. There was no clean answer. What was certain was that Lord Voldemort would not be coming back. His Horcruxes were destroyed. His body was destroyed. His wraith was dissolved. There was in the world no longer any anchor on which any part of his soul could recollect itself. The being whose long shadow had fallen over the wizarding world for 50 years was over. The being who had killed Lily and James Potter on an autumn night in 1981 was over. The being who had killed Diana of Themysciran on the stairs of Godric's Hollow on that same night was over. The being who had set in motion the events that had taken the Longbottoms from their son was over. He was over. He was finished. He was, in the Lasso's grammar, past tense. Harry stood in the blue-flamed room. He felt at last the warmth on his wrist flicker. He had been waiting in some small place in himself for this flicker. He had known that the night would, in the end, exact a price. He had not known the shape of the price. Now he knew. The lasso was leaving, not abruptly, not with violence. The lasso, having done what it had been brought across the veil to do, was going home. It was unwinding from his wrist. It was lifting away. It would, by some small old transit, return to the temple of Hestia from which it had come. He felt it lift. He felt in lifting the presence that had lived in it begin to lift also. He said very softly, aloud, "Lass." The voice in his head, the voice that had been his for 15 years, said, "Yes, little one. You are going. I am little one. The work is finished. I cannot stay. The lasso belongs to Hestia. The lasso was loaned to me. I borrowed it for one job. The job is done. I am to come home. Diana, SHH, little one." SHH, listen. He listened. She said, "You are my heir, Harry. Live with the truth I died to give you. Live well." The lasso lifted clear of his wrist. It hung in the blue air of the room for half a second, a length of bright gold rope, glowing softly with the soft warmth of a goddess's hearth, and then it was not there any longer. It had gone to where it belonged. The room felt cooler. Harry stood with his right wrist bare for the first time in 15 years. He looked at his wrist. He felt with great wonder the absence of the warmth. He felt, and this was the strangest part, that he was not, in fact, alone. The presence that had lived on his wrist had been, in the end, only the residence of a person who had also lived in him. The person had moved out of the residence. The person had not moved out of him. He could still hear her, not as he had heard her, not as a voice in his ear, but as a quiet inner ground, a small persistent floor under all his thoughts. He could remember everything she had ever said to him. He could remember her face, the face from the place, perfectly, as if he had seen it 10 minutes ago. He could remember the cliffs and the breath of the sea and the figs and the wax tablet and the stances. He could remember the small song about the fish and the gulls. He could remember the lesson about the stick. He could remember her hands on his cheeks on his 5th birthday. He could remember her telling him on the morning of his Hogwarts letter that he was about to begin, that the school was about to be his, that the country was about to follow. She had been right about all of it. She was, he understood with a great and slow gladness, going to be right about the rest of it too. He was going to be all right. He was going to live with the truth she had died to give him. He was going to live well. He stood in the circular room of 12 doors in the Department of Mysteries. His friends were behind him. The old man and the Aurors were at the far end. The pink flat figure on the floor was beginning to breathe normally again. The Wraith was dead. The Lasso was gone. The war was over. The wizarding world had been changed by the careful application of a goddess's truth into a world that was not perfect by any means, never perfect, but better. The Longbottoms would still be in St. Mungo's. The dead would still be dead. The hurt would still be hurt. But the country would now slowly mend instead of festering further. And Harry Potter, 15 years old, an orphan of multiple kinds, a small, thin boy raised in a cupboard by an Amazon, would walk out of this ministry and into the rest of his life. He took in his right hand the hand of Ron Weasley, who was on his right. He took in his left hand the hand of Hermione Granger, who was on his left. He stood between them and felt, on his suddenly bare wrist, the absence of his teacher and the presence, through her, of his mother and his father and his Sunday mother who had not lived long enough to be one in the flesh. He walked out of the room. His friends came with him. IV, Coda. A long time later, not a few minutes, not a few days, but a few years, a young man stood at the edge of a cliff above a sea he had never seen with his waking eyes. The sea breathed against the cliff. The light was the light of late afternoon. There were olive groves behind him, smelling of dust and resin and the faint smoke of an outdoor kitchen. A tall woman with gray hair came down the path. She wore a cloth simply about her shoulders. She was old, older than Harry's grandmother in any human sense, but she walked as one walks who has always walked. He turned to her as she came up. He said, "Hippolyta." She said, "Yes, child." He did not know what to do. He had imagined this moment for 10 years. He had imagined it the wrong way, he knew. He had imagined it with words. He could not now find any. He stood in front of her in his muggle shirt with his muggle haircut and his suddenly muggle hands hanging by his sides, and he could only look at her. She did the thing he had not dared to imagine. She took his face in her hands and pressed her forehead to his and said, into his forehead in a low voice, "My grandson." He did not, in front of her, weep. He had been raised by her daughter to keep his tears for later. He kept them. But he closed his eyes and stood, with her hands on his face, for a long time, by the cliff, with the sea breathing below them and the smoke of an outdoor kitchen drifting up to them and the warm dust on his bare feet. After a long time she stepped back. She took him by the wrist, by the right wrist, the wrist that had been bare for years now, and she turned the wrist over and kissed the pulse. She kissed it gently in the way of women who have lost daughters and have decided not to be ruined by it but to be sweeter for it instead. She said, "You were her work. She did the work well. Come, child, there is supper. There is a place at the table for you. There have been many years of practice eating without you. Tonight we eat with you. Come." He went with her up the path. Behind them the sea went on breathing. In the small temple of Hestia on the altar, the lasso of Hestia lay coiled, alive, watchful, patient, ready for the next century's necessity. It had done its work. It would do more. It would wait. It had time. A goddess at her hearth smiled.